Alrighty. Testing, all that jazz. Hello. If y'all could please let me know if you could see and hear me. That would be swell. Hopefully everyone's doing well. Also, I've just realized that because we're doing this kind of stream, I actually don't need to wear my headphones, do I? Because I actually use the correct system this time. So hello. Hopefully you all can see and hear me, and everyone's having a good day. As you probably saw in the announcement for the stream and everything, we were hoping to have Andy back today, but he's not quite there yet. He did do a stream on Friday for LAWhammer. I think he just kind of pushed himself a little too hard. he went a little overboard. So he just needs a few. He's getting there. He's getting there. So we're really hoping to have him back next week, but it's far more important to me and hopefully to all of you that he take as much time as he possibly needs. That way we can have him back in tip-top shape, because we don't want him to rush back and not be feeling well. So that being said, due to that, y'all are stuck with just me again for this week. But I wanted to do something for today just because I know it's been a bit since we've had anything really big going on. So I just wanted to come on and chat with y'all and hang out a bit instead of just only showing up when I feel like playing Space Marine 2 with people. But yeah, hopefully everyone's going really, really well. We'll get everything in. We'll get into everything here in just a little bit and go over lots of cool stuff. Warg Druid and Lord Gron, thank you both very much for continuing your subs. Warg with the 24, 2 years. Thank you, my dude. And Grond, thank you for the 27 months. Really appreciate that. But yeah, so we're just gonna hang out, chat some Warhammer, but you can also feel free to ask about anything. It doesn't have to be Warhammer related. I am enjoying seeming to have gotten my sleep schedule back on the right path, which is really great. I'm feeling very good and being up at a good hour. And yeah, I binge watched Chainsaw Man yesterday, so that was fun. That was most of my day. But also, Felix, thank you for becoming a member. Really appreciate the support. Thank you so much. Tyrant, just finished reading the Gotrek and Felix novel where the steward insists that the dead lord is recovering while he robs the castle blind. Needless to say, I'm deeply suspicious of the Loremaster right now. Listen, none of y'all have the keys to the Lorebeards Vault, and none of you are ever going to have keys to the Lorebeards Vault, so you don't need to know what's going on in there, and it's none of your goddamn business. This is what that is. Tech, do we need to start to get a life wizard? Sadly, I don't think even with public funding we could afford a full-time druid of the life college at Andy's home. It's not feasible in the economy in the empire these days, or over in Albion, however you want to spend it. But he is starting to feel much better, and Lindsay's doing an awesome job taking care of him. And hopefully we'll have him back before you know it. And Holy Artist, thank you very much for 31 months. That is a very long time. Yes, it is. So let's go ahead and get into just answering just chill questions from the chat. This will, because of the format here, if someone does something relating to like super chats or bits or whatever, I will make sure to prioritize those just to make sure I don't miss them. But I'll also just be kind of looking through the chat as we hang out to kind of just grab out individual comments that are like, oh, I could answer this real quick or whatever. But yeah, hopefully anyone feeling great and we can go on our end times versus battle next Sunday. I know he's really, really eager to get back to it, but yeah. Okay, so I think I saw one. He's not destroying himself for yeah, I know, someone that actually has like a reasonable relationship with content creation. Wow, crazy. Any thoughts on doing a Gotrek and Felix travel map? That could be an interesting idea. I that would probably take a suspicious amount of work. I don't know for sure if I don't know. Like that's a fun idea. That might be something to do at some point. I could maybe do that if we end up like taking a break for a while. That might be something fun to do to kind of like work my way back through the series, because there's a part of me that kind of wants to reread through some stuff. What do we know about the Shadowkin, the Umbernoth, and Age of Sigmar? Not a lot. Very, very little. We know that they have some kinds of shadow demons with them, and we know that they also have a lean into draconic body types. So their culture seems to have like a mixture of some dragon aspects and some shadow creature aspects. As far as what's like this, like what are the specifics, we have no idea. They're coming at some point. I just don't know when. Do hobgoblins have Wa magic like other greenskins? Yes, they do. This was actually recently confirmed by Cubicle 7 in a book that actually just published. I just got my copy in my other room. It's called Tribes and Tribulations, and it basically has a whole bunch of information about all types of greenskins and ogres, including hobgoblins, which was actually a pretty big surprise when I initially read the book, because I didn't really think they were going to bring up hobgoblins, but they do. And one of the things that they bring up in the book that's very interesting is that hobgoblins have shamans, but hobgoblin shamans are not like regular greenskin shamans, where regular greenskin shamans tend to be big Wa or little Wa. The hobgoblin shamans are able to use both the big Wa and the little Wa simultaneously. So they really walk this line between venerating Gork and Mork equally. And also they have, they kind of walk that line between Orc and Goblin. So they use both lores, but they have limitations. I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head, but there's aspects about Wa magic that normally the other benefit from, but they don't. So like while they're able to use from both lores, they're not masters of it. They're weaker than goblin shamans and orc shamans, but they have some interesting variety capabilities. What do I think of the Alien Isolation sequel confirmed by CA? Awesome, very exciting. A lot of people really, really love that game. That game kind of seems like it's kind of like a cult classic, where, to my understanding, when it initially released, it didn't necessarily sell super great, but since then it's become like one of the most beloved horror games that people play nowadays, and the AI is still like deeply, deeply appreciated for just being incredible. So yeah. Let's see. Have I written any Warhammer books? No. I'm not a writer in any true capacity. The closest thing I've ever done to writing that has ever been released are my deep lore videos, especially like my Heinrich Himmler, Scepter the Imperishable, and Belagar Ironhammer videos. Those are probably the ones I'm the most proud of, where I started, instead of just regurgitating information, I tried to tell you all of the lore while also tying it all together as a story, which means I had to add a lot of my own stuff to the best of my ability while trying to make it honor and true to things that other people had written. And when I originally did it, I felt like it was a little weird to do that, but I'm comfortable with it. And it's something I really want to do for Queek. So like when Queek eventually, at some point, hypothetically, perhaps maybe comes out, it'll, instead of it just being, if you read all the books, here's the basics. It'll be, all right, here's everything I was able to find, and then I'm going to use my own storytelling ability to try and make it into a arcing narrative that makes it a cohesive story. But there are assumptions that I have to make about like what's the exact order certain things happen in, because the writers don't flesh that out. Like a good example is that if you read the Queek Headtaker novel, it focuses a lot on Queek attacking Katak Azul, but there's no specific mention in the book about when that happens in his like storyline. And the end times, one of the things that make Queek particularly difficult to research, and why that video ended up turning into so much more of a marsh than I hoped it would, is that a lot of Queek's information is spread out over like a considerable amount of pages. And he has a very short life that is just stuffed with information. A frankly almost unrealistic amount of information. Especially in the end times. The end times adds so much lore to Queek because he's technically the main character of part 4. Even though it's called End Times Thankful, it should have been called End Times Queek because Thankful does virtually nothing most of the book. Queek and Skrulk are really the two big bads of that book. Thankful has a part in the book, but he's not really that important to everything that happens. But I would say Queek is by far like the main character. And if you get the side book, which is where all the juicy details are, which is Rise of the Horned Rat, Queek is literally just the main character. He just is. Like it's the book is all about Queek, Skarsnik, and Belagar, and that's pretty much it. But anyway, so let's see. How much can I talk about the new Cubicle 7 book? I can talk as much as I want about it. Like I bought it. I don't have a relationship with Cubicle 7. I would like to have one, but I don't have one. But it's an overall good book. It has issues. It has definite problems. Like I've got a sticky note here on my PC that's just like all of the problems I had with the book written out so that I can make like a video and also send them an email. They made some really weird mistakes in the book. But to my understanding, the guy who wrote most of it wrote the original Dwarf book way back in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, which would have been in like the 1990s. So they brought him back to write this book, which was cool, but it meant that there are certain sections where you can tell that he doesn't know like there are gaps in his knowledge, and they're really obvious when they happen. Overall, though, it's a super good book, but it definitely has a pretty staggering amount of like spelling and grammar errors, and also is missing some significant lore issues that need to be fixed. But that's something I'll talk about coming up, because I'm going to do a dedicated set of videos for that. Battlefoot, best wish to Andy as he continues to battle the internal fishmen, trying to keep him down. Now for our Loremaster of Sotek question, which Age of Sigmar realm was most likely to invent Tex-Mex cuisine? Akshi, obviously. Well, yeah, I would say Akshi, either Akshi or Gairan. But I feel like you would want to go, like the best Tex-Mex would be in oh my god, what's that city called? The main city. The big city of the city that's in both realms, like a Hammer Hall. It would be in Hammer Hall, where the city like has a realm gate in the center of it, so it's in both realms simultaneously. So like half the city is in Action, half the city's in Gairan. You'd want to go to Hammer Hall for Tex-Mex. Slanesh Wars Empire Strokes Back. Yeah, I think I've probably seen that one. Do you think we'll get a DLC reveal soon? No, I don't. There's usually like, so we know they're gonna do at least one more patch before the next DLC, and that's not out yet and hasn't even been announced yet. So I would keep an eye out for when they announce the next patch, which is 5.3, I think. So keep an eye out for 5.3. Once 5.3 comes out, then we're probably within like 2 to 4 weeks of announcement, and then there will be like another 2 weeks before release, would be my guess. But I don't know, I'm guessing. So keep an eye out for that. What happens to a vampire when they die? So when from a vampire's perspective, when they die, it's blackness. They die. They fade into nothingness, and they're no longer conscious, they're no longer aware, they just cease. What happens to a vampire from an outside perspective is that when a vampire dies, the dar that allows their body to function and allows them to remain sentient within their corpus, their body, basically is cut off, and it causes their body to, depending on how they die, it'll either just turn into a regular corpse, it might burst into flame, it might like collapse into dust, it could do any number of crazy things, depending on what kills them precisely. But the important thing to note is that they're dead and they're no longer aware or feel anything or any of that jazz. Now, what's important and kind of implied, I think, in your question, is that vampires do not have an afterlife. They don't go anywhere. They're just dead. That's it. Bye. Good night. It's like falling asleep, right? They're just gone. However, because vampires, everything that they are, including their soul and all the various components that make up their soul, is bound to their physical form. It means that their existence is tied to their body and things that they had like an intimate relationship with. So like their weapons and armor, or personal effects that have a lot to do with them. And the thing that's scary about vampires is that a vampire is never guaranteed to be dead. There is no way, none that we know of, there is no way to kill a vampire in such a way that they are permanently guaranteed beyond doubt dead. That is not possible to our knowledge. Because if any part of them remains, including like just dust, like, right, like you burn them, you incinerate them, you melt them down to ash. If someone deeply desires to bring that vampire back, they don't even necessarily need that, but having it makes it a lot easier. But there have been, in order to truly get rid of a vampire, you would need to utterly obliterate their body. Like, I'm talking like you're going to need warp fire braziers or holy flame, burn them down to absolute ash, and then you need to distribute that ash far away from the rest of it at the bottom of the ocean. But then you need to get rid of anything and everything that's even associated with that vampire. You need to like melt down all of their equipment, melt down all of their personal effects. You need to bulldoze their castle. You need to kill anyone that knew them. You need to erase their existence from all knowledge. Like, there cannot be any records about them. No one can know their name. No one can know they existed. If you can like basically destroy them to that level, then I would argue they are, by that point, dead. Truly, undeniably. But even then, if Nagash were to come back and Nagash decided he wanted that vampire, Nagash could reasonably bring them back because he's just that fucking scary. But that's a pretty extreme case. But there have been a number of vampires that have been brought back through some just silly levels. It is very, very difficult to kill a vampire for real. And a lot of people do not realize that, so they don't tend to kill vampires as much as they probably should. You know, a lot of people just tend to like cut off their heads and they're like, oh yeah, they're dead, and they bury them, that's it. Or, you know, things to that nature. And you you need to be a lot more thorough. What is more likely, Total War, Age of Sigmar, or 40k? 40k. I deeply believe that Total War Warhammer 40,000 is already in development. I don't think that's that. I feel extremely confident about that. I don't know when it's going to come out, because I would be surprised if they don't make a new engine for it, because I don't think the stuff they have now would necessarily be worth trying to like, you know, work 40k into that. It'd probably be easier to build something from the ground up to a lot of extent. and that is going to be difficult. It's going to take a lot of time. Let's see. Is the Sigmarian heresy a thing in canon? It depends on what you mean by canon. Because there are a lot of different kinds of canon in Warhammer Fantasy. I would say, is the Sigmarian heresy canon? Yes. But is it something you would see brought up in an army book? No. Not unless you had like a writer at Games Workshop who was like a huge fan of the Enemy Within, and he was like, oh, I want to include a reference here. And in that case, he might include a reference to the Sigmarian heresy. But if they, most of the time, that's pretty heavily on the RPG side of things. So that's just not something that Games Workshop tends to care about, but it is something that has been consistently canon for 30 years in our world. So I would say it's canon. What is the Sigmarian heresy? So the Sigmarian heresy basically breaks down to, there are a couple different ways to describe it, but the basic breakdown is that there are people that do not, in the Empire, that believe Sigmar is not a god for various reasons. And the Sigmarian heresy revolves around that very heavily. And if you play through the Enemy Within campaign, which is a legendary tabletop RPG campaign that originally was like a big campaign for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay way back in the day, like the first edition, and got remade for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, which is the modern edition. It's something you will interact with as characters. Tyrant, new dwarf player guide implies that the Chaos Dwarfs fight the dwarfs regularly in the Eastern World's Edge Mountains, and that they had a hand of the Great Collapse that caused the Time of Woes. Thoughts? Yeah, so it's a really interesting book. The Dwarf Player's Handbook is very interesting because it has lore, but it's more about setting stuff up for people that want to play as dwarf characters. There's another book that's going to be coming out in the near future-ish that I think they're going to call Stone and Steel, from what I've heard, and it's going to be the Game Master's Guide to Dwarf. So it's going to have like adventures and maps and like really detailed information and character profiles and a lot more of the nitty-gritty things that you don't want the players to know, right? So they can experience the world and the adventure. So in the player's guidebook or handbook, they include little bits and pieces all over the place. And one of they bring up two really interesting things with the Chaos Dwarfs. The first is the Chaos Dwarves. Well, I'll say three interesting things. First, the Chaos Dwarves get a couple of cool mentions throughout the book, which makes sense. The only reason the Chaos Dwarves were not mentioned more often in 6th, 7th, and 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy is because they were not playable. Games Workshop was very heavily focused on the old world. After the Storm of Chaos, the Chaos Dwarfs just kind of like ceased to exist. Like they showed up in the Warriors of Chaos Army book, and then obviously they came back really big and hard for Tamarcon. But there's always been little scatterings of Chaos Dwarfs showing up in various books. Like if you read, I think it's Honor Keeper. I think that's the right book. There's a book that's about the Dwarf King Barrendon. Barrendon Stoneheart, I think it is. And it's like his life story. Awesome book. It is a 10 out of 10 book. I love the King of Zufbar. And Barrendon fights the Chaos Dwarfs in like this really big epic battle during the Storm of Chaos alongside King Ungram Iron Fist, and it's super fucking cool. So it's like, oh, what happened then? But then the Storm of Chaos got retconned out. And then if you read Gotrek and Felix Road of Skulls, there's a whole Chaos Dwarf attack against Katakadrin. Super cool and awesome. The Chaos Dwarfs should be a fairly relevant threat to the dwarfs of the World's Edge Mountains, especially along the east. So the eastern parts of the mountains, which mainly would be like Katakadrin and Karazakarak. Probably just those two, realistically. But because they didn't get a ton of information, or because Games Workshop didn't have a playable army for them really outside of Forge World, and even when we got them for Forge World, it was pretty late in Warhammer Fantasy's life. They just didn't expand on them very much. But in the new book, there are 2 cool lore updates with the Chaos Dwarfs that are very exciting. The first talks about that the Skaven, the early Skaven, when they were making their Doomsday engine, there are theories. The book deliberately says it's like, oh, it's a theory, it's a mystery. They don't say it. They say there are myths that the Chaos Dwarfs helped the Skaven create their Doomsday engine, the one that blew up and almost wiped the Skaven out as a race. But because it blew up, it opened a bunch of cracks like all across the world, and it also caused a gigantic earthquake to rip through the World's Edge Mountains, and that caused the decline of the Dwarf Empire. And so the book insinuates that the Chaos Dwarfs may have had something to do with it, which is super interesting. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I don't know if that's something they're going to want to ultimately run with, but it's very curious. And I think it's a fun storyline to explore, because I will say it would make sense that the Skaven at their earliest encountered Chaos Dwarfs, and that's where their advanced technology initially came from. Because when you read the original Skaven lore, the Skaven just kind of like manifest these like insanely powerful forms of technology, and like sorcery science, where like the Doomsday engine is when all of the Skaven live in Skaven Blight. So there are no clans yet. It's like, not that we would know. Like Clan Scryer and them, they don't exist yet. It's just like Skaven. There's no like Black Pillar yet in Skaven Blight. The Skaven haven't spread out. They're all in Skaven Blight in that area. And so the idea that the Chaos Dwarfs may have had some kind of contact with the Skaven way back, and that somehow led to the Skaven's sudden advance in technology, would make a lot of sense. Like that would be okay, that's interesting. Now I don't know if Games Workshop is going to consider that something they want to run with like in the future canon, but I think that would be kind of cool. That being said, there is the whole thing of like, how did the Skaven in the Blighted Marshes meet the Chaos Dwarfs over in the Darklands? But like I said, they only kind of mention it as a theory. It could be that no, they had no contact whatsoever, and that's just a theory. So there's that. But the other thing that's brought up in the book that is super interesting, that I'm actually really interested in where Cubicle 7 is going with it, is that Cubicle 7 mentions that the vampire counts of Sylvania have been making contact with the Chaos Dwarfs. So the vampire counts have been sending messengers, trying to secretly send messengers over the World's Edge Mountains to the east into the Wolflands, and then out into the Darklands to reach the Chaos Dwarfs, and that they've been talking to each other. And there's a specific mention that Thorgrim Grudgebearer is aware of the fact that the Sylvanians and the Chaos Dwarfs have been talking, and he's really worried about it, because those are not good allies. Like that would be really bad for everybody, especially the dwarves, because they would be sandwiched between them. So Cubicle 7 seems to be building a story there, and I'm very, very interested to see where that one goes. All right, let's see. This one looks interesting. The Hekarans don't allow women to use magic, but the deity in their pantheon that deals with magic, Assaf, is a goddess. How do they square that circle? That's a really interesting one, isn't it? So within the Nehekaran culture of the old lore, I don't believe this has been retconned. To my understanding, this is still the case. The mortuary cult, which is the cult that utilizes magic, with something you need to understand is that there's 2 different groups here. There are the priesthoods, so each of the gods had priests, and then there's the mortuary cult, who end up becoming wizards. They're still priests, they end up becoming the lich priests, but they actually learn to use magic. And the mortuary cult puts in a law where it's men only. Only men are allowed to use magic. Magic is the domain of men, which is actually super interesting, because if memory serves, Nehekara is actually the only place we know of in the entirety of the Warhammer world where magic is only allowed to be used by men. If you go everywhere else, either everybody can use magic or only women can use magic because men are considered like too dangerous to wield it. But Nehekara was the opposite, where they thought that men were the only men were powerful enough and only men could handle the powers of magic. And of course, this leads to the whole Nagash shenanigans. And that whole not being allowed to use magic thing is a key part of Neferata's story, where Neferata rebels against the mortuary cult and is able to be manipulated by Wazoran, who teaches her magic secretly. But when it comes to this particular question, so Assaf is the goddess of magic. I think the way that Nehekarans would kind of square it, to be blunt, is that Assaf would have been the one that brought magic into the world and the one that would have gifted the ancient Nehekarans with the knowledge of magic. But nonetheless, it still belongs to the mortuary cult. It still belongs to the men of that culture. And it's something that they use, because the mortuary cult in particular was obsessed with power. They abused it brutally, where the mortuary cult wielded the promise of an eternal, life, an eternal life in paradise with a golden godlike body is what they promised Cetra, and then they promised it to every single Tomb King, Tomb Queen, Tomb Prince, and Tomb Princess that came after. So the mortuary cult acquired so much wealth and so much power because they made all these promises and they were just gobbling up power for themselves, and they didn't like to share it. They guarded their knowledge very jealously. And magic seems to just kind of ended up being included in that. That being said, you would have a priesthood of Assaf that very likely was either all female or mixed. I imagine most of the cults were either mixed, or if they were monogender, were probably the gender to reflect the god they worshipped. And it might have depended on the individual tomb cities. But the lore there is a little more shaky. But yeah, it's interesting. Let's see. Hamble, Swift Needle, thank you for the super chat. You mentioned the White Dwarf shows up to help those who need it to complete oaths. Consider he's a dwarf all the same. Would he ever appear before a slayer, considering how personal their oaths are? Yes, I would say absolutely yes. I believe there are times that he would appear to a slayer, and if he did so, it would likely be because he is guiding them to their doom. Or he might be there to take from them the oath that they were unable to fulfill that caused them to take the Slayer oath in the first place. He might be there to take it from them since they cannot fulfill it, and maybe he goes on to fulfill it. Or maybe he's there to help guide them to a proper doom instead of dying from some random thing, or making sure they're in the right place at the right time so they're able to die a truly epic, honorable death, defending a hold, or holding off some terrible beast from a line of refugees or some other thing. But yeah, I would say he absolutely would appear to them. Let's see. Noblars use magic? No. Noblars and Snotlings cannot use magic. They appear to be too small, diminutive, and lame to use magic that I have ever seen or heard mentioned. It seems that you have to be a certain caliber of green skin in order to be a shaman. That being an orc, a goblin, or a hobgoblin. Seems if you're smaller than a regular goblin, which Noblars are, then no dice for you, boss. But could be there are Noblar shamans, and maybe they've just been suppressed. Maybe there used to be Noblar shamans, and then when the Chaos Dwarf started enslaving them, and the ogres started eating them, and then they teamed up with the ogres, maybe being integrated into ogre culture has resulted in there being no more shamans. Who's to say? But I've never heard of a Noblar shaman. Can anybody 1v1 Aminar, the Merworm? Yeah, sure. Draupnir, the father of dragons, could. Krakenrock the Black would be a fair fight. there are other titans of that size that exist in the world. Um, things like there was like, I'm sure whatever the biggest, baddest Dread Saurian is could do it. Now, could they kill him easily? No, I don't think anything could kill him easily. But are there things that could fight him? Yeah, absolutely. There are demons that could fight him if there was enough magic in the world for like truly titanic greater demons to form. One of them could fight him. It would not be an easy fight. And Aminar has a pretty hefty win record. So there's that. Watchdog, what is one thing Wolfrip does well that a game like D&D could learn from? In my personal opinion, the two biggest things I vastly prefer about Wolfrip over D&D is that A, there's a lot more emphasis on non-combat skills. Like what kind of things do you do outside of combat? And they're very detailed and give you a lot of options. Every time I play, every single fucking time in my life I've played D&D, I always inevitably end up running into a wall where I really want to do not a lot of non-combat related things. Like I really want to be like lean heavy into apothecary stuff, or I want to lean heavy into certain religious stuff, or I want to lean heavy into like more social political stuff, or like doing more like little role play heavy things. And D&D tends to not be well equipped for that within its own books. Like oftentimes, if you want to get any kind of details with that, you have to have a very, very creative DM, or you just need to go like super out of your way, or just use completely different system. Wolfrip has all that built into the core system, which I really, really like. So that one, I also much prefer combat in Wolfrip, because in D&D, every character has just an obscene amount of like abilities and skills. And like, even when you're playing kind of a simple combat class, you can often end up having like multiple pages of like, oh, I could do this, and I could do this. And like, if you level up very suddenly, you're like, I have no fucking idea what's going on with my character. That is not a thing in Wolfrip. In Wolfrip, you get just better at the things you're doing. But because you get better more progressively, there's not like level spikes. You're just incrementally getting more powerful over the course of the campaign. It's way more manageable in my opinion, and the combat rewards you for using your imagination, period. Like in D&D, I feel like it's more about, oh, I need to make sure I use like the best skills that I have, and like what are the biggest dice rolls that I get. So like, oh, this only lets me use a D4, but this lets me use a D8, and like a lot of that. Whereas Wolfrip, it's everything's the same for everybody. Wizards and priests have some slight shenanigans, but it's like, everyone's rolling D100s. It's a percentile system, so it's super easy to grasp. And when you're in combat, it's, oh, you don't actually have that many like technical actions, but the game heftily rewards you for being extremely creative, of using your non-combat skills in combat scenarios, of like, oh, you know what? I'm going to try and build advantage in this combat. Is there like, hey, GM, could I like, while all my friends and stuff are fighting around me, I'm not really a combat person. I'm doing more of like this other kind of character. Could I maybe try and like look for a way to take advantage of the room we're fighting in? Is there like some furniture? Is there something I can kind of manipulate to like help put my opponent in a worse position and my allies in a better position? And in many cases, GM would be like, oh yeah, that's super easy. Like roll me like you could do like perception or intuition or any number of skills. Or you might have someone that's like, you know what? I'm gonna try and make myself seem like super pathetic, and I'm gonna like hide, like throw myself on the ground and be like a sniveling, crying baby to make myself seem like not important, and for them to be like, oh, I should take care of these other guys instead. And the GM might be like, oh, you know what? Oh yeah, sure. Like roll me like a charm check, or something that is that form of deceit. And there's a lot of really fun interactions, and it really encourages the player to be as imaginative as the DM is. And I feel like every time I play with a lot of different D&D groups, I've played with some really awesome DMs, I've played with some really newbie DMs, and it feels like D&D it's much harder for that to be the case. I also much prefer the Wolfrup leveling system, where it's you constantly earn XP and then you constantly spend XP to increase your various skills by percentage points and your characteristics by percentage points. And like you buy like new talents every once in a while. But it's not like you leveled up and your opponent, you like are like, oh, I just suddenly magically know how to do all this new shit that I didn't know how to do yesterday, which always feels really weird to me. Whereas that isn't a thing in Wolfrup, which I like a lot. Hobgoblins venerate Waluigi. Yes, they do. They are very Waluigi coded. Do I think Time of the Three Embers is a good time to return to the setting? Well, kind of. That's not really when we return to. Like, we kind of return to the very end of it. We're at the very, very end. For Warhammer the Old World, we're in like the last 20, 30 years of the Time of the Three Emperors, which lasted for centuries. So they returned to it, kinda. But I do think the Great War Against Chaos was an ideal time to return to. I do think that is the best choice, honest to goodness, because it lets you have all of the factions. Everybody was doing something. Now, GW's not using all of them right now. Hopefully they will in the future. But it lets you have everybody that you did in old fantasy, and it also lets you explore a time that was really important but never really explored in the older lore. Let's see. Why does Cubicle 7 refuse to make a new Bretonia book? So the honest answer is that the Knights of the Grail source book is pretty good, and while certain elements of it are now very out of date, most of it, 85 to 90% of it, you can use with very minimal rewriting. So it translates into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition with very little effort. So in Cubicle 7's opinion, it's better for them to make books about things that have not been written about at all, like Lustria or the Dwarf Player's Handbook, which have like never been made. And like the upcoming book we're about to get for dwarfs is like the other version was back in 1st edition, and it's basically impossible to use. A lot of what's in it is not helpful. So and like they're planning to do like an Ulthuan book, which has never been done before. So they're focusing on things that have never been done. 2nd edition stuff is just not really that. It translates very well. So while I would love for them to do a Bretonia book, just like I want them to do a Kislev book, just like I want them to do a Vampire Counts book, it's just not really needed right now, like the other books are. Is there any lore significance to Ender Koresh? Yes, tons. They're fairly unexplored, but we know enough to know that they're really interesting places. Like we know about the Naga of Koresh, which are snake men, though there are some people are kicking around the idea that the Naga and the snake men might be two different tiers of a species. So like there's the Naga at the top and then the snake men are beneath that. But there are tidbits all over the place that talk about them. And they're very fascinating places that I really, really hope Games Workshop is going to explore. And if we're really, really lucky, maybe we'll get them in Total War as well. What heroes do you think could have beaten Archaon? None. Nobody. That is the point of Archaon. The point of Archaon is he is the bringer of the apocalypse. He is the big bad. He is the absolute... He is the end. And ultimately, I don't think anybody individually could kill him. I think a group of individuals could take him, which is how he is defeated in the end times. You know, he gets softened up by Grimgor destroying one of his artifacts, and then he kind of gets whittled down by several different characters until Sigmar beats him. But I do not believe if you write Archaon into Warhammer Fantasy and he is defeated in single combat, you messed up. You made a mistake because that's not how he's supposed to work. I think that's an oops. Now there are characters that are physically more powerful than him or magically more powerful than him. They're better than him at a specific thing, but Archaon's overall combination should make it where he comes out on top, even if he gets a little damaged, even if he takes some hits. He should always come out on top unless he's like been really whittled down. Granted, when you really think about what he's capable of, he is pretty fucking terrifying. The idea that a lot of people don't really realize how scary he is. The Eye of Shirian alone, so that gem that sits in his forehead that gives him the third eye, so he's the three-eyed king, that thing in his head not only grossly boosts his magical ability, so it makes him a way more powerful wizard than he normally is, but it allows him to see the future with excellent clarity. Excellent clarity. So it's not like Kairos Fate Weaver, where it's like, oh, he sees every possible future, but he's blind to the present. Archaon sees every possible future, and the closer it gets to him, the more narrow it gets. So by the time you're in combat swinging your swords at him, he knows what you're going to do before you do it, because he literally sees it in his head. So he sees what you're going to do, and he's reacting to it. And that alone makes him borderline impossible to beat, because trying to fight someone who knows what you're going to do before you do it is basically impossible, which goes to show how much of a badass Grimgor Ironhide was, that Grimgor Ironhide managed to destroy the Eye of Shirian by headbutting Archaon as hard as he could in the face, which is just great. Hi, I need inspiration for a roleplay. Nipponese samurai returns home with her Bretonnian knight companion. Excuse me. To retrieve the samurai's honor due to failing to protect her former lord. Cool quest. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be very, very solid. So she's returning. So she's returning to Nippon from Bretonnia, but she has a Bretonnian knight companion. I mean, probably the best thing to do, it would depend on where exactly the story's taking place. Like, are you starting in Bretonnia, or are you starting in Nippon, or are you starting like between the two? The biggest thing I would recommend is that I would focus quite well on the journey to Nippon from Bretonnia to there, because that's a long fucking trip. And there are two cool ways you could do it. You can either do a giant sea voyage where you leave from Bretonnia and you go all the way around the Southlands, all the way up past the Dragon Isles, past the Kingdoms of End, past the jungles of the hinterlands of Koresh, up towards the Cathayan coast, and then hey, you're in Nippon. That's a long journey, and you can make some really cool stops along the way to get supplies, and also encounter all sorts of exotic, crazy monsters and beasts, and you can encounter a lot of different races traveling that distance. That's a long, long way. Alternatively, you could take the overland route and go the Ivory Road, in which case you go from Bretonnia down to Telea, and then you follow the Ivory Road from Maragliano, which is a super fucking long journey that'll take you across the Darklands, into past the Mountains of Morn, past the Ogre Kingdoms, past the Ancient Giant Lands into Cathay, and then you journey across Cathay and you get to one of the Cathayan port cities, and then you hop across that short ocean trip to Nippon. So it just depends on kind of, do you want more of an overland story route, or do you want a sea route? There's a lot of cool things you can use either way. If you want to have more encounters with things like, sea monsters, lizardmen, terrifying storms, dark elves, high elves, pirates, all that crazy shit, and you want to go to really exotic places like the Kingdoms of End, the Naga of Koresh, the jungles out there and all that stuff, then I would go the ocean route. If you want to run into really well-established Warhammer fantasy races and deal with like the Border Princes and the Dwarfs, and then the Chaos Dwarves out in the Darklands, and the Hobgoblins, and and the greenskins that are out there in force, and then go through the ogre kingdoms and have to pay. You could join up with a caravan that's traveling the Ivory Road, which would be super fun. And if you're doing that, there's a lot of really, really good lore you can pull on. I would especially recommend the Imperial Zoo book from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition. I would also recommend, if you could find a copy or an online copy, check out the Dogs of War book from 6th Edition Warhammer Fantasy. And if you could find a copy, any of the Ogre Kingdom Army books from 8th Edition or 6th Edition, should give you a lot of cool inspiration. CEO of Necromancy. Hey, Sotek, I've been reading Stormcast lore, and I was wondering which Stormhost is my favorite. Anvils. Yeah, Anvils with the Heldenhammer is my favorite. Because I really like their color scheme. I like that they're heavily implied to have characters that died during Warhammer Fantasy. So it's heavily implied they've got some like ancient heroes among them. They also they have themes I really enjoy. They have some really cool stories, and yeah, they're great. I very much enjoy the Anvils with the Heldenhammer. My next highest personally would probably be, what is it? What is Hamilcar's? Whatever Hamilcar's Stormhost is. I forget what they're called. All right. Here. Who would win an eating contest between Greasus and Devil Yeho or Narcarkos from Monster Hunter? I don't know who those other two. I don't know what those other two things are. I don't know what a Narcarkos is, and I don't know what a Devil Yeho is. So I'm just gonna say Greasus because it's fucking Greasus, and he just keeps going. He'll just keep going. He always keeps going. Urson, hey, Sotek, TTRPG question. I'm the owner of most 2nd edition books. Is it worth getting the 4th edition? Yes, I think so. I think it's worth it because a lot of it's good, and if you don't like parts of it, just don't use those parts. I think it's never bad to add to your library. Like I think even if like 50% of the book you don't like, which I doubt you'll hate that much of it, that still gives you 50% great stuff. What's the elevator pitch basics of Drakenfels? Drakenfels is tricky. I have very mixed feelings about Drakenfels. So Drakenfels is a big bad from older Warhammer Fantasy, notably older. And he is, oh gosh, the base, my version of the elevator pitch for him is that he's Vandal Savage in Warhammer Fantasy, which if you don't know who Vandal Savage is, that kind of messes that up. But Drakenfels, the storyline for him is basically that he was a guy, though he wasn't necessarily human. He was more like proto-human. So he was like before humans. And basically there's a meteor that comes down. And I can't remember if it's a warpstone meteor or if it's just like a random meteor. I want to say it's warpstone. And it impacts near him and he gets close to it. And it ends up changing him. And he's much older than you would think. Like he's older than humanity. And he's basically been this asshole that's been kicking around for thousands of years. And because he's from a much older form of Warhammer Fantasy, he has a lot of really bizarre parts that when you look at it from nowadays, you go, those don't go together. But he is a demonologist, so he specializes in the summoning and use of demons. But he's also like big time necromancer. He's also kind of like a vampire, but he's not a vampire. And he's a weird guy. And basically he is someone that's been kind of hovering around the backgrounds, and he tends to hang out up in the Gray Mountains. And he has a series of storylines where every once in a while he'll do something that will just cause shit to go down near him. So like he'll be experimenting with something and he'll like accidentally summon a legion of demons that like attacks the Empire and burns Uberstrike to the ground. or he'll unleash some horrible amount of dark magic that like mutates and kills a bunch of people. But he's got a big old scary castle up with the Grey Mountains. He's a big pain in the ass to Bretonnia and the Empire for a long time. I want to say Sigmar fought him at one point, and he's basically unkillable. Like, you cannot kill him at all. Like, you can. There is a whole series about him of books, the Drakenfels books, which it is October. They are part of the Warhammer horror set from Black Library, and they were re-released not that long ago, so it's pretty easy to get a copy of the Drakenfels books. I think they're also on audiobook as well. Like, I think if you go to whatever the big audiobook website is, which I think Audible. I think they're on Audible, which I think I have a link down below if you want to use that to get a free audiobook or whatever. But that's basically what he is. He's a weird, super powerful, super immortal guy that gets in a big shit fight with the vampire Genevieve and her boyfriend Detlef Sierk, who's a playwright, a very dramatic playwright. And they manage to defeat him and destroy his body. And after he dies, he basically becomes kind of like a formless creature that doesn't have a body. And in the End Times, Games Workshop really wanted to bring him back, but they weren't sure if they owned the rights to him or not. So they brought him back as this thing called the Nameless, which is an invisible, bodiless spirit that has the ability to possess people and control them like puppets. And he eventually possesses the warrior priest Luther Huss, who kills him. Because Luther Huss basically is like, Sigmar, and like is so holy and faithful that Drakenfels is inside of him, and it like burns him out and kills him. Because that was the only body he was left in. And so Luther Huss kills him randomly. But yeah, anyway. He's a weird guy. Scion, if we got a Forest Goblin DLC down the line, how would I build it? What mechanics would you give them? So, if we got a Forest Goblin DLC, which is a video I need to make because I hope we'll get one, as the last Greenskin DLC. And when I say Forest Goblin, I don't mean pure Forest Goblin, just like a mostly focused Forest Goblin. So I would do Tenant Four Eyes, which for those that don't know, Tenant Four Eyes is a Forest Goblin Great Shaman. So it would give us a Forest Goblin Legendary Lord who is also a Goblin Shaman, because obviously we do not have a Goblin Shaman Legendary Lord. Skarsnik and Grom are both war bosses. They are not shamans. So that would give us a shaman, Goblin Shaman character, which would be great. And he rides a big old nasty Ragnarok. It's the Black something. It might be the Black Terror. I forget what it's called, but it's the Black something. It's like an Ragnarok on cocaine. That's very big and very nasty by Ragnarok standard. It's like one of the biggest Ragnaroks in the world. So you have him as your legendary lord. Then for your legendary hero, you would do Snagla Grobspit, obviously, because he's also a Forest Goblin special character. And Snagla Grobspit is a super big badass that rides a very special giant spider. It's a species. It's the red venomback, I think. It's the last of its kind. And Snagla, is the last of his tribe. So they kind of have like that relationship. So you have those two together. For your generic lord. So for the generic lord, I would probably do, based on what we have now. So currently we have Savage Orc Great Shaman. CA's revealed is coming up in the next DLC. So we have the Savage Orc Great Shaman. We've got the Orc War Boss. We have the Night Goblin Big Boss. And we have the Goblin Great Shaman. Is that it? I think that's everything, right? So, so you kind of got your bases covered there. So your realistic option, I think, would be either a Black Orc War Boss or a Forest Goblin War Boss. I think either would be fine. I think either would be fine, because mixing it up a little bit would be totally fine. But you could do a Forest Goblin War Boss who has like a big focus on anti-large, can ride all sorts of different kinds of spider mounts, has a big focus on like cavalry, and all that kind of stuff. But you could also do a Black Orc war boss and have more of like a super heavily armored, big fighty war boss, and make the regular orc war boss a little bit more focused into like more generic orcs, more of a like a character that's big and fighty, but he also has like some support, more leadership skills than a Black Orc necessarily would. Then from there, for your generic hero, I would probably do the Goblin Shaman. Maybe. Well, I don't know. I'd be on the fence about that. I think for the overall greenskins, the best case for action would probably be the Savage Orc Big Boss, because the Savage Orc Big Boss would give you a very like not at all armored, just relies on physical resistance, but he gets like quick access to magical attacks, big anti-large focus. He's really aggressive, and hits really, really hard, but he's not like an assassin type character. He's more of like a bruiser type character. So like with the Black Orc Big Boss is really, really heavy and has some leadership skills and is like a big, heavy, tough boy. With the Savage Orc Big Boss, you would have more of like a glass cannon. That is like you throw him in and he just messes up monsters. Very big anti-large, very big armor piercing, and just tear shit up. And then you have your Goblin Big Boss is more of like a character assassin, really, really fast and maneuverable. I really do think the regular Goblin Big Boss should be given a shooting attack. I would really like for him to get a bow. If they could give the regular Goblin Big Boss hero that we already have a bow, I think it would do a lot. But then for units, I would do gigantic Spider Rider Cavalry. So gigantic spiders are like between giant spiders and Arachnaroks. They're monstrous cavalry. So we would get a monstrous cavalry greenskin unit, which we don't have, that would have poisoned attacks. They could have a mixture of bows and spears. You could give them like light to medium armor because they could wear like the chitin chitinous shells of like dead spiders, and they could cause fear and have like striders, so they're like really maneuverable and can fight well in forests and all that. So I would do gigantic spider riders. I would do the we're missing an Arachnarok variant, so I would do the Arachnarok spider with web flinger, which is like a catapult that shoots spider webs. So it doesn't like deal a lot of damage, but it does debuffs. So if it hits you, it would like grossly reduce your movement. So I would probably be like, oh, you lose like 50% movement for 5 seconds or something. So it's really good at like slowing people down so the spiders can then swarm them, or slowing down enemies so you can get away. Then from there, I would probably do Snotling swarms. So kind of similar to the Nurgling swarms we have now, but like a little horde of Snotlings would be fun. And then I would do the Savage Orc Big Stabba if we don't have it yet. We might get that in the upcoming DLC. It would make sense to get in the upcoming DLC. But if we don't have it by then, the Savage Orc Big Stabba, which is 2 Savage Orcs carrying like a really big spear that they use to kill big monsters. And then I would probably do... if they gave us the Black Orc War Boss, I think Black Orc Chariots would be cool, which would be super big, heavy chariots pulled by crewed by Black Orcs, but pulled by boars that are more heavily armored and better for like getting into combat and staying in combat as opposed to cycle charging. So I would probably do that. I think that would be my list. All right. Moving on here. Sandbox. With Age of Sigmar, do you have any ideas to solve the issue Andy has with them, namely making them somewhat distinct from old fantasy Skaven? Been trying to think of ideas, but it's hard to think of something completely new for them. So the answer to this is tricky, because with Age of Sigmar, I need to be clear that I don't agree with Andy's opinion on this. I should make that clear. I do not think Age of Sigmar has to make everything in it completely unique. I think that introduces sometimes unnecessary bloat, to where Games Workshop as a company would be wiser to make use of using factions that can be used in multiple settings, so they can take up less model space, less range space, but still be supporting multiple games. Granted, GW may not see it that way, but that's what I would do if I were them, because I'm smarter than them. But however, if you wanted to make the Skaven distinct in Age of Sigmar and make it where it's not just fantasy Skaven in Age of Sigmar, what you would have to do is make them very, very different. So what I would do is I would get rid of the Great Clans. I would go in, get rid of Clan Pestilence, Clan Scryer, Clan Molder, and Clan Eshet. Get rid of them, throw them in the trash, and I would create 4 brand new Great Clans that are completely different, which would suck. That would be so much work. But I think that's what you would have to do, is you would have to go into the Skaven and you'd have to rip out the themes of the major like components of the Great Clans and replace them with new parts. Because then you would have, they'd still be Skaven, but they would be distinct because they would be using weapons and strategies and systems that are very alien to the ones that would exist back in Warhammer Fantasy. But I don't think that would be a good idea. I think that would be a bad idea. I think what they're doing now with the Skaven is fine. They should just let you play Skaven as well in Old World. Time to put Annie in a bubble. Hope he gets better soon. No, don't put him in a bubble. He's fine. Lindsay's taking good care of him, and him being in a bubble would make that harder. That being said, he definitely we definitely need to install like a thing on all the doorways to Annie's house, so that when anyone comes in, they have to get scanned to make sure they're not bringing anything in that's going to make them sick. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Woodstove, how could the human tribes that would form the empire were so technologically backwards when they migrated from the Strigani Empire was? So, Woodstove, most of the tribes that would come to inhabit the empire, actually, I'm going to rephrase that. None of the tribes came from the Strigani Empire. So Strigos, which is where the Strigani are from, the human descendants of the Strigos Empire are the Strigani people. The Strigani, that's it. They lost their homeland, and because it was swallowed up by greenskins and overwhelmed and overrun, and they were deeply hated by that point by the northern tribes who were attacking them. The northern tribes that had been manipulated by Neferata and the Lamian vampires into attacking Strigos and putting pressure on it. And the relationship between the Strigani and the northern peoples was ugly. So by the time their empire fell, they were already deeply ostracized and deeply despised by the people that they were now going to as refugees. Because even if humanity hates you, it's better to deal with a humanity that hates you than fucking greenskins, right? So the Strigani have unfortunately been a people without a home for many hundreds of years. And they have remained a nomadic people that are often kind of viewed with a lot of suspicion, and they deal with a fair amount of racism in the Warhammer world because they don't conform to a lot of the ideas of the nations that they travel through, which causes conflict. And some of them, I wouldn't even say most of them, but some minor amounts of the Strigani are still actively working with vampires. And when that gets found out, that casts a really ugly shadow on all of them. Because then the people that don't like them use it as evidence of like, oh, look, all the Strigani are evil. They're all working with vampires. When most of them are just trying to like get by and live their lives and are pretty chill. They often are like river folk that travel the rivers of like the Empire and such, or they travel in caravans along land. But they are not the ancestral tribes of the Empire. The ancestral tribes of the Empire came from the Far East. So they came from what we now know as the Eastern Steppes. There's like this big old chunk of land northwest of Grand Cathay, and it's mostly just everything north of Grand Cathay, but it's to the west a bit, above the Mountains of Morn. Because if you go too far east, then you're kind of in the Chaos Waste, because some of the Chaos Waste like comes down closer to the Great Bastion. But the Eastern Steppes are like mostly above the Mountains of Morn, and go up for quite some ways. And that's where most of the ancient empire's people came from. And they were driven out by, well, why they left depends. Some of them like heard the call of various gods, like in the case of the Gospodari of Kislev. They heard the call of Mother Kislev, aka the Ancient Widow, and Kislev kind of summoned them to itself. But many of them were either chased out by the Chaos Waste expanding southwards. Some of them were chased out by the rise and domination of the Hobgoblin tribes and the Hobgoblin Khanate. Some of them were just came down to more fertile lands to conquer, but a whole bunch of them migrated down roughly at the same time. Those were your Unburigans, your Tutagans, and Scythians, and like all those ancient tribes. Let's see. Mictrex, there's a rumor engine image that looks like the back spines of a Saurus. What do you think the model is, and when do you think we'll see it? I would bet heavily it's probably not a Saurus, because I don't know. Games Workshop gave us a lot of goodies for Seraphon, and I just have a hard time believing they're going to do it again so soon. But could be. It's probably more likely to be like Tyranids or something. But God, what is? Oh no, it's not game. Right, they're not. It's not Games Workshop anymore. It's Warhammer Official. Let's see. They put their rumor engines on. Did they put their rumor engine on Twitter? Or do I have to? Oh, here it is. Talking about this thing? No, that's a brutal looking weapon. You said back spine. God, my throat is so like dry today. Oh, here's all the different rumor engines. Let's see. I don't know if I see one that looks like back spines. That one looks like something on fire. That one's a hand coming out of something. That's a drill. That is some kind of big blade. If you're talking about the most recent one, to me, that looks like a weapon. And it's definitely 40K, I think. I mean, it could be AOS, but I think it's 40K. All right. Vren, Medigan, thank you very much for the super chat. My question. Why would a necromancer not want to become an immortal vampire? Have any necromancers or anyone else tried to recreate the elixir of immortality? Also pissed Beastman being dropped by GW. Yeah, so yeah, Beast of Chaos being dropped fucking sucks. Sucks so much. I hate it. Hopefully the only way they can redeem themselves is if the plan is to create a Beastman like race that's just gives us two, where we have Beasts of Chaos and Fantasy, and then we get like the spawn of Morgur or whatever, because they're still running with the Morgur storyline in Age of Sigmar, which means Morgur might come back. And if Morgur returns, then whatever's with him, I will be Beastman-esque, as far as I'm concerned. Why would a So, okay. Has anyone ever tried to recreate the elixir of immortality? Yes. People have tried. No one has succeeded. A lot of people have tried, but doing so without the full relevant book of Nagash that you would need, or books of Nagash that you would need, you're going to end in failure. Yeah, there's just no way. You're just not going to have enough relevant information. But no one has succeeded thus far. And nobody will, because we've seen the world blow up. But why do some necromancers not embrace immortality? So necromancers, it depends on the necromancer in question. Because they're individuals, they have like all of their own reasons. Some necromancers do not want to become vampires because the only way to become a vampire is for another vampire to give you the blood kiss. It's the only way. Literally the only way. Except for one exception, but that's not important to this discussion. And to become a vampire means that you belong to another vampire. When a vampire gives you the blood kiss, you, especially for like your early years as a new thrall or vampire spawn, you are very beholden to your parent in darkness. They have a lot of control over you. They have a lot of influence over you. You belong to them. And a lot of necromancers are very, very power hungry individuals who really like at the idea of anyone lording over them, being anyone's subject, having a master. They hate that idea. So like your Heinrich Himmlers of the world or your Doom Lords of Middenheim would not at all be interested in becoming a vampire, because to them that means you have to submit to someone else, and they just refuse. Just pride. There are some that know that necromancers tend to have a very academic understanding of undeath and what a vampire is. And many necromancers, because of their relationship and their knowledge of dark magic and necromancy, know that vampirism comes with a price. And it changes you. Any vampire that believes they're the same person they were before and after is just lying to themselves. Very much so. It corrupts you. It alters you. And necromancers look at that in much the way that, like, imagine if I came to you and I said, hey, I can give you a surgery that it's going to be pretty painful. You might die. But if you survive, you will be immortal. You cannot die. But you will also not be you anymore. Like, you'll probably still think you're you, but like, I'm talking to an expert, I'm talking to a fellow professional, it's not really you. Like, you as you are, you're going to die. You're going to cease to exist. And there's going to be this new thing that kind of is made out of what you were that will exist instead. And some people may look at that and go, oh, well, that's still me. So obviously I will say yes. And there are other people that look at that and go, no, fuck no, God, no, that's not me. Obviously that's not me. Gross. So that would kind of be what I would say. Now some necromancers just might not get the opportunity. And it just depends. There's prices to it. You have to find a vampire that's willing. You have to deal with the ramifications of getting owing such a thing to that vampire, whether it's a favor or barely surviving an encounter with them or yada, yada, yada. Plus, a necromancer can hide much easier than a vampire can, because a necromancer is a living person. A lot of the tricks that work against vampires don't work against necromancers. You can use all your holy symbols and all of your wards against undeath and all of your prayer bullshit and your miracles and your spells and your light magic, and a necromancer does not give a fuck. He's a living person. He can walk through all your wards and not a care in the world. He can disguise himself and blend in among humanity very, very easily. And the best vampire hunters in the world will not know he's there because he's not a vampire. So there are trade-offs. Whew. Let's see here. Can I shame you into watching Fury and Beyond's End with $5? No. Now I might watch it of my own volition, but you can't bribe me with $5. I'm not that cheap a whore, okay? I've got some standards, not much, but some. Let's see. Can you share the videos in your Discord DM, please? Probably not. Oh, those ones. I'll think about it. No promises, but I'll think about it. Maybe at the end of the stream. Let's see. You know what I will do though? You know what I will do for you, Hammond? I will post them in chat for anyone that wants to watch them on their own. How about that? I will do that for you. So here, I'm gonna post these in both chats. Hammond made a haha funny. He made some goofy rap battles utilizing some AI stuff. If y'all would like to see what Hammond has been up to and some stuff he has made, by all means indulge yourselves. Make sure to, if you enjoy it, to leave him a nice comment and all that jazz. Agar89, what do you think of the Dwarf book just released? Seems pretty good, but needs some editing. I agree. I'm gonna try and talk softer, because I think the reason my phone is bothering so much is I must be shouting. So I'm gonna try and talk a little softer, a little more radio voice. Hopefully y'all can still hear me okay, and hopefully it'll make my throat less irritated. But to answer your question, I agree very much. My only big issue with the book, my only massive issue with the book, is that it really fucks up the Thorgrim Grudgebearer storyline. And there's been kind of a weird thing where, like, I really haven't liked Cubicle 7's portrayal of Thorgrim. Like in the Sea of Claws book, I really don't like the way they write about him, and they've kind of continued that here. So my big issue is that it really messes up Thorgrim's kind of origin story. It also just gets some stuff flat out wrong. The book says Thorgrim is hiking Alric's son. That is not correct. That is not right. That has never been the case. That was not the case in Old Fantasy, and it's also not the case in the Old World. In the new Old World lore and all of the Old lore, Thorgrim is hiking Alric's nephew. So that was a really simple mistake that is kind of worrying that they didn't catch that. And also it says that hiking Alric's did not go to fight at Kislev, that he just stayed home, which is also not correct. That's wrong. And also ruins his story. Hiking Alric's is supposed to lead the dwarfs to the battle at the gates of Kislev, where he ends up being mortally wounded, and he dies a year later, because he should have died then, but he's so fucking stubborn that he refuses to die until he's picked an heir that he is okay with. And he ends up holding like a contest where everyone that wants to try and become High King has a year to go out and accomplish great deeds, and then come back, and basically the king will be selected there along by like a council of elders and Longbeards and the king. And all of these different dwarfs go out to perform great feats. Ungrim kills like a fucking bone grinder giant. A couple of other notable princes do some cool stuff. Thorgrim though comes back, and he's like recovered some incredible lost treasures, and he also went and forged an alliance with the Norskin dwarfs, where he actually like went up there and he helped them, and some of the Norskin dwarves came back with him and spoke of his deeds and like all the cool shit that he did. And the new book just completely fucks that up, where like hiking Alric's just, there's no explanation of why Thorgrim becomes High King. There's no mention of how Alric's dies or when he dies. So it's just a fucking mess. They also messed up the timeline in several parts. Like they said High King Alric's father, High King Alric, died like 3,000 years ago, which is not right. That is super wrong. So yeah, there's a lot of mistakes that just need to be fixed. Let's see. What sort of stuff would you like Gloomspite Grots to get? They have some fun Centipede stuff in Bad Moon Rising. The big thing for me is more insect stuff. I want there to be a major forest goblin update. So like more new types of spiders, like I want them to take the spider riders, the spider fang grots, and flesh out their part of the roster. To me, they're made up of they're made up of Trogoths, Moon Clan Grots, and Spider Clan Grots. The Moon Clan Grots and the Trogoths had both had full model range updates. and they have also had special characters made, where you've got the Moon Clans have Scragrot, the Loon King, and the Trogoths have Trug, the Troll King. So I want my Spider King. I want my big Spider King. And I just want new Spider Minis and all that other stuff. Let's see. Drakenfeld's not a vampire, so he's a Carpire. Yes, indeed. Vamp. But yeah, sure, he's a Carpire. Is Andy okay? He overall is. He got really sick. He got really, really sick. Which really, really fucking sucks, but it happens sometimes. However, he is already feeling much better. He's just not quite ready to come back yet. I know it's, trust me, I've been worried about him. Just as much as y'all are. It's been spooky because this is the longest he's ever been ill. Or so ill that he wasn't able to do the things that he really loves doing. But he should be coming back next week, hopefully. And when he does, we'll have to make sure that we welcome him back with extreme open arms and graciousness. Hey man, what did the spider say when he died? Are you shitting me? I actually like that one. Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that. Ricky Chapman, Drakenfels versus Nagash at their peak is something we would pay money to see. That would genuinely be a very good fight. That would genuinely, in my opinion, be a very good fight. I think that would be I would enjoy that very much. The Gamer Cad, thank you very much for the 6 months. I really appreciate the support, by the way, over on the Twitch. Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Vorn, Cubicle 7 Stone and Steel Collector's Edition and High Elf Player's Guide and Ulthuan Collector's Editions. It's going to be a grand couple of years. Cubicle 7 Glaciers movie. Cubicle 7, I overall really, really like them. Yeah, they publish really slowly. They also have a pretty, unfortunately, high amount of grammatical and spelling errors in their books from time to time. I don't know who their editors are, but they could probably afford to be a little more stringent. Like, I don't know. It feels silly when you pay like premium price for a book. You're paying like a pretty good amount of money, and then you get it, and it's got like really silly errors. Their editors are not the best, but it is what it is. Dowie, what's one monster or unit concept that does not touch fantasy, AOS, or even 40k that you think should be implemented? I was thinking maybe something similar to a Beholder for Vermeer, but that might be too IP owned. Oh gosh, something that is in none of the settings that I would really like to see. I mean, something like a Beholder would be very cool. I think for me, the biggest thing would probably be for me, it would probably be a very truly genuine horror-themed Lovecraftian race. Of whether that's aliens, fishmen, insect people. There's a lot of different ways you could take it. But there's not really something that speaks to the Cthulhu-esque Lovecraftian mythos very much. Despite the fact that like they use tropes from it, and I'm sure there are lore books that have mentions of those kinds of things, but there's not like much of an army to it. And that's something that would probably be good. That being said, I've always been a very big proponent of if there is a creature that exists in historical mythology, our world's historical mythology, then it has and should have a fantasy counterpart. Something that's vaguely based on it in fantasy. But that isn't necessarily a popular opinion. Like, I don't think Andy Law would agree with that. Andy, it's funny. Whenever you chat with Warhammer fans, there can sometimes be an interesting disconnect between one of the things that I really, really love about Warhammer Fantasy is I love when something that exists in our world as a trope or a creature or a mythology or like some kind of crazy god or like fascinating types of ways that cultures waged war. I love when those show up in fantasy and get to see them reinterpreted through a Warhammer Fantasy lens. But I know, like, I don't think that's something Andy likes. I think Andy is more of the opinion that Warhammer should kind of like be its own thing, or Warhammer Fantasy should focus more on being its own thing and focus less on like adaptions. Which is, I don't want to put words in his mouth. But that's something that I tend to enjoy that not everyone does. And it can get sticky. And that's probably the big reason why is that like if you're taking like a mythology or like epic monsters from like certain kinds of religious stories or cultural stories, I do think you need to be careful about how you adapt them, because you shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm just going to take the design and make it like a punch up. Like, I think you should look into what does the creature represent, like what are the stories around it, and try and do a genuine adaptation, as opposed to just like copy paste or do like there's always the really classic thing of the Wendigo, right? Of like the actual Wendigo stories versus what they kind of got turned into through like American media, where the Wendigo, if you ask a lot of people what a Wendigo is, it's a very likely chance they're going to say, oh, it's like a big monster with a deer head, like a deer skull, and it's like emaciated, but it's got like the deer skull head, right? And that's not what a Wendigo is, right? That's like you could say that's what a Wendigo is because cultural media has done that to it, but like the original Wendigo is nothing like that. It's very, very loosely inspired, to say the least. So like that's not a good example of how to adapt a creature into Warhammer. Like I personally find that the Morn Goal, the actual lore and stories behind the Morn Goal in Warhammer Fantasy, is a much more faithful adaptation of the Wendigo than say like the Elemental Incarnate of Beasts, which someone might look at that and go, oh, that's like a Wendigo, the Bloody Hidesman. It's like, no, it's more like the goof version. Yeah, anyway. But that being said, they could absolutely get away with Beholder. I think Warcraft has Beholder like stuff. Ain't no reason Fantasy couldn't get away with it. Let's see. What are Dragon Ogres like in Age of Sigmar? Is there any kind of new models? No. I wish. I really wish. Best place to get started in the lore of Age of Sigmar. So if your goal is just to hop into Age of Sigmar and you're not too worried about like, I want to know everything, I just want to know some stuff, I would just recommend picking up whatever army book you think is the coolest, or pick up the most recent core rulebook, because they tend to have really fat lore sections that are very good, like general explanations. If your goal is that you want a very cheap entrance into the setting, like you don't want to spend a lot of money, I would recommend picking up one of the anthology books, where it's like just a big collection of short stories. So like the ones that I have that I really like are Oaths and Conquests. And there's another one called Sacrosanct and Other Stories. There's also another one called Myths and Revenants. Those are all really good because they're big books that are pretty cheap. They're like $20. And they just have tons and tons of short stories. So you get to see a lot of different factions, a lot of different races, and like all sorts of different kinds of stories, to help you kind of figure out a lot of different things going on in the setting. But what are Dragon Ogres like? They're interesting. The Dragon Ogres in Age of Sigmar I actually really like, but Games Workshop hasn't done a lot with them. And now that the Beasts of Chaos have been removed, I don't know if they're still a thing. I think they might have been moved to Slaves to Darkness now because the Beasts of Chaos roster got removed. So I think the Dragon Ogres got moved over to Slaves to Darkness, maybe. But in Age of Sigmar lore, the Dragon Ogre, so Krakenrock the Black survives the destruction of the Warhammer Fantasy World, which is wild. So Krakenrock survives, and basically he just like goes hurtling off into space hilariously, and he ends up eventually kind of crash landing or is drawn to the realm of Azir after it forms, God knows how many millions or whatever years later. And he basically sets up shop, and he starts he repopulates the Dragon Ogre species. How? I don't know. I don't know if he mates with like some other monster or if he could just reproduce asexually, who knows. But it's what's interesting is it very heavily implies, or actually just outright states, the Dragon Ogres are no longer infertile, which they were in fantasy. It's a core component of their story. But after the Warhammer Fantasy World blows up, their pact with the Dark Gods was fulfilled. So they're no longer infertile. So he repopulates this race, and they expand into this big old race that takes over the mountains of Azir. And they are its natural inhabitants. Like, they're its first big inhabitants, and they spread out to the other realms as well. So they're not just in Azir, they spread out to some other realms. But the Dragon Ogres like have a pretty cool time, and they set up big shop in Azir, and it's their home. Like, they are the first race to truly be the masters of those mountains. And then Sigmar shows up. So many, many thousands of years after Krakenrock has brought back his people from the brink, they have settled into life in these mountains. It is their home. It is their ancestral home. Sigmar just fucking shows up. And Sigmar shows up and is like, hey, I like this Azir place. This is mine now. Get the fuck out. And the Dragon Ogres go, how about go fuck yourself? And a huge fight breaks out. And this big old war happens. And it builds up to Krakenrock the Black, who is basically a demigod. Or no, he's more like a god. But he's what's called in Age of Sigmar, he's what's considered a zodiac beast. Or a god beast. He's like fucking super powerful. Him and Sigmar get into a big fight. And Krakenrock ends up losing, but he's so big and powerful and scary that Sigmar isn't able to kill him. He just wounds him. And Krakenrock ends up retreating and flees from Azir to a different realm. And basically, Sigmar just like uproots this entire culture because he doesn't like them. And he kicks them all out. So he basically banishes all the Dragon Ogres. He kills any that try to remain. And he chases them out of their homeland out into the mountains of the other realms. And so they set up shop in a bunch of different places. They win in some places, lose in some other places. Like, they have some nasty encounters in the mountains of Gur. Eventually, when Chaos shows back up, so when the Dark Gods return, the Dragon Ogres pretty quickly join Team Chaos because fuck Sigmar. Fuck the Order factions who kicked them out and like took their homes from them. So they join up with Chaos, and instead of it being a desperate bargain of a dying species, it's instead because they want revenge or justice, depending on how you look at it. So they're interesting. But no hints of new models. I am desperately hoping we get a Krakenrock the Black mini for Age of Sigmar, because he's like the same size roughly as Kragnos, the god of earthquakes. So like they could do his mini. It would be a big mini, but Age of Sigmar has very big minis. I would really like to see that. Vampirism equals immortality, but work for Ted Cruz forever. Yeah. So not worth it. Mictrek, the Saurus Spine image rumor was posted on the 7th of May. 2024. Holy sweet lord, that is a super fucking long time ago. The Games Workshop website doesn't even go back that far because they redid their website in July, so like I can't go back that far physically. It doesn't go back that far. Yeah, bummer. But hey, if we got new Saurus, that'd be cool. I'd love Krokgar to come back. If Krokgar came back, I would literally lose my shit. Like I would be a screaming shitting. I would be like shitting myself live on camera. Like it'd be crazy. Cole, are Nurgle zombies true undead or quasi undead, and how do they interact with necromancer / zombie vampire zombies? So Nurgle zombies, that's a tricky question. Depends on the zombie. Sometimes a Nurgle zombie is not dead. It is a person that is so on the brink of death, like they're heavily emaciated, they've like open sores and like big gaping wounds, their like organs are like swelling out of their bodies or hanging out of open wounds. They've got like bacteria and parasites all over them, eating them alive, but they're still technically alive. So you have those kinds. Then sometimes you have parasite situations. So like one of the things that Tarmakon did when Tarmakon shows up at Zambijin and fights the big battle there, one of the things that Tarmakon does when he starts winning and Nurgle's favor kind of floods over the battlefield is that a bunch of flies come down and start crawling in the orifices, so like into the mouths and the eyes and the ears and everything of all these corpses that are all over the battlefield, and they start puppeting the bodies. So these demon flies basically work their ways inside the corpses and the soon-to-be corpses, because some of the people were still alive, and they like jerk upwards and are functionally zombies, but their corpses being puppeted by these little insect parasite things. And then the last case is that sometimes they'll be puppeted by like demons. So you can have a demon take over a body, so a magical force that possesses a body and uses it to run around. Which doesn't necessarily have to be Nurgle either. If you actually played Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, there was some Black Library books that came out about it. Empire and Chaos, I think, is the first one. And one of the things you learn about that book is that one of the big things that's going on is that there's actually a Tzeentch plague, where there are people getting sick and dying, and then their corpses are being possessed by like Tzeentch demons that start attacking people, and it's horrible. How do vampire zombies interact with them? So necromancer and vampire zombies are corpses that have dark magic animating them. Sometimes they have like a little smidgen of soul stuff returned to them to like animate them and move them around and stuff. So in that case, it's often a situation of you have an animus, a magical force being controlled by a necromancer or vampire. Not always. Sometimes it can just happen because there's too much magic in the area, and it causes like a little shred of that person's, the composite thing that we call a soul. A shred of that is brought back to them enough that they get up and start moving around and attacking things. So in those cases, you're dealing with a corpse that is brought back to a semblance of some form of life, a mockery of life, through the use of magic. Whereas in all of the Nurgle cases, it's either someone that's not really dead, or it is someone that is being, or it's just a corpse that's being manipulated by something inside of it, as opposed to the body actually getting up on its own. So that's the main difference, if that makes sense. And if they ran into each other, they just attack each other. Which, funny enough, the Nurgle ones would probably be tougher to initially take down, but the vampire ones have the distinct advantage of no matter how many times they get taken down, they can be pulled right back up. The only way to put a corpse down for good is to decapitate it or destroy the head. But even if you do that, if the vampire or necromancer in question just decides to exert more energy, they can make it where the head reattaches, or like they can meld the flesh back together, which obviously is a problem. Joey B, confused on the timeline of Dark Age Tech Man and Priest/Eldar. Do they exist at the same time? Who had more turf? So Joey, I appreciate the question. This is a 40K question. So I am not an expert on this. However, this is technically a Ask Sotek Anything stream. So I'm going to attempt to answer this, even though I don't know for sure. So to my understanding, if I recall correctly, the pre-Eldar was a really fucking long time ago. And I want to say, if I remember right, I believe there's something that has... So Dark Age of Technology, that would be after humanity has already explored the stars. So that would be after Slaanesh is already born. So I would say that... Did they exist at the same time? I would say they did not. If I recall correctly, Slaanesh is already around by the time of the Dark Age of Technology. I think. Don't quote me on that. I don't actually know. I think that's what happened. I want to say Slaanesh is before, or is made before that. So I don't believe they existed at the same time. I apologize you wasted your money. But hopefully, I don't know, that's something. Sean Schultz, how many of the High Kings of the Dwarves do we know? Ooh. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's... I'm sure somebody's comprised a list. We don't have like a continuous number by any means. But we know, like, a lot of them are just mentioned. Like, it'll just be like, oh, High King so-and-so died at this battle. Or High King so-and-so won a great victory over here. But it's very messy. Actually, so a little insight into my brain. One of the things that I was hemming and hawing over, for the new Cubicle 7 book is, in the Cubicle 7 book, it states that the High King of the Dwarfs is the King of Karazakarak. So, like, all the High Kings are from Karazakarak, which I'm pretty sure is not true. But I haven't had time in the last few days to double check it. But I want to say the older lore says that there have been High Kings from other holds. Like, I'm pretty sure Carrick 8 Peaks used to has had a High King. And that it's based on and plus, like, Alricsson's entire story, like, kind of doesn't make sense if Cubicle 7 says that. So I think Cubicle 7 fucked that up, but I haven't had time to look that up yet. But how many do we know? We just don't. Like, I would probably guess like maybe 20, maybe. There's also an issue where sometimes when Games Workshop is writing about Kings of the Dwarfs, they'll be talking about a guy we know is a High King. Like, he's been stated elsewhere to be a High King. But when Games Workshop references him in a different situation, he is only referred to as King so-and-so instead of High King so-and-so, even though he's actually High King. So there's this whole messy thing where we don't necessarily know, when all the time they're talking about kings, if it's really just a king or if it's actually a High King, but they're just calling him king for the sake of, like, type space. So it's messy. Ranger of Shadows, thank you very much for the super chat. What are your guesses for the Wood Elf characters that will be returning to the old world? Are there any good Wood Elf books I could read in fantasy? So yes, there are. Guardians of the Forest is a super good book. Guardian of the Forest is a great book that shows off Athel Loren. There's also a pretty notable Wood Elf scene in the Black Plague trilogy. I want to say it happens during Wolf of Sigmar, which is the last book. It's either Wolf of Sigmar or Dead Winter. I think it's Wolf of Sigmar, though. So the Black Plague trilogy has some notable Wood Elf parts. The Orion trilogy is it's obviously purely about Wood Elves because it's about Orion. That one's pretty solid, so I would highly recommend that one. If you're like, I just want a Wood Elf book, and I just want to I just want to bury my face in Wood Elves. Understandable. I would probably recommend the Orion trilogy first because then it's just pure Wood Elf goodness. Then I would recommend Guardians of the Forest or Guardian of the Forest by Graham McNeil. That one's super duper good. I would also recommend Grail Knight by Anthony Reynolds. Grail Knight by Anthony Reynolds has Drycha and Ariel and some other cool stuff in it. And then the Black Plague trilogy. That would be my go-to list. Who's my best characters for returning characters? Definitely Orion. I would be willing to bet so much money that Orion will come back. They've been doing either 2 or 3 characters per book. So for Wood Elves, I would guess it's probably going to be like Orion, the Sisters of Twilight, and maybe somebody new. Well, I guess the Dwarf book technically didn't have any new characters. Though bringing back Damnitson was kind of a surprise. If they were going to make me happy, I would probably do like Orion, the Sisters of Twilight, and Ariel. That would probably be a good trio. Let's see. Nils, get well, Andy. Yep. Very much. Hopefully get well soon, Andy. Nice to see you, Sotek. Hope you get back together soon. Have I played Dark Tide? Yes, I have. What's my main? Psyker. I really enjoyed the Psyker class. I haven't played it in a while, but Psyker was my favorite. I liked making heads pop. That always made me happy. Is there any hope for Beastmen in the old world getting new models? Yes. I would say there is. Now, do I think the Beastmen are going to get new models with their Arcane Journal, which is apparently going to be the last one, it looks like? No. I highly doubt they're going to get any new models in the Arcane Journal because nobody's been getting new models. So don't expect any new models. I would expect a lot of returning models. Like, I bet they'll bring back Malagor's model. I bet they'll bring back the old Morgur model. They might bring back the Gothor the Beastlord model, maybe. They're probably going to return a lot of minis that you haven't seen in a long time. Now, second edition Old World, maybe we'll see some movement. But first edition Old World is not really about new minis. First edition Old World's more about re-releasing old kits. Which I don't like, but that's just the situation we're in. Theme Team, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. You have a very cute profile picture there. Love the ASAs. I said in your Discord, I thought I would get your opinion. Do you think that if Conrad von Karstein lived longer, he would have become a Vargulf? Ooh, that's a good question. I would say if Conrad was going to survive, especially surviving the return of Manfred, yes, I think he would have become a Vargulf because it's the only way anyone would have not. It's the only way his existence would have been tolerated because he's so fucking dangerous. I would heavily recommend he'd be too problematic. That being said, I do not believe he would spontaneously turn into a Vargulf. I think someone would have had to do it to him. He would have needed to been captured by Manfred and suffered through a set of things to end up suffering the transformation into a Vargulf. I don't think it would have happened naturally for him. Because although Conrad is batshit fucking crazy to the point where he literally had a special rule called one bat short of a belfry. He's fucking insane. There's a wicked, brutal, cunning intelligence to Conrad that would have, I think, kept him in his human form and prevented him from embracing the bestial nature enough to undergo the transformation into a Vargulf. That being said, that being said, although we know Vargulfs are vampires that lose themselves to their bestial hungers, we've never actually gotten to like see a vampire turn into a Vargulf. Every time a Vargulf shows up, even when it's a Vargulf that can like kind of talk, which I can think of at least 2 books where there's a Vargulf that can talk. Even when that happens, we only get to see those characters post their transformation, not pre. So we don't get to like see them devolve into one and like what are the specific steps. So it's a pretty nebulous gray zone. But I will say of literally all of the vampire count characters we know of, like all of them, I would say Conrad would be first place for most likely to turn into a Vargulf, which would have been really fucking cool. I'm not gonna lie. Bamora, hey Sotek, hello. Hope you're having a good morning. I am, thank you. If you could add one faction/army range to the 4 AOS domains respectively, what would they be? Oh, this one's actually kind of easy because I've been thinking about this a lot. So for Order, Umberneth, not even a question. Shadow Elves, yeah, please. Just Draconic Elves, like if they're like actual Elf Dragon hybrids, I may actually pick up that range because I love dragon people so fucking much. I love dragons. So they would be big. For Order, they're my number one for Order. For Chaos, it's Chaos Dwarfs or Chaos Dwarden. Once again, not even a question. Easy. Children of Hashut. Yep. Easy for Chaos Race. For Destruction, that one is a little difficult because you could go 2 ways. My personal preference would be the Famir. Because the Famir were playable in first edition AOS and they were labeled a Destruction race for some reason. Which is like, okay, cool, whatever. So I would do the Famir because I just want to see them brought back. And I think they could have a really, really cool range. So I would do the Famir for Destruction. Though if someone came to me and was like, what about Fishmen? I'd be like, ooh. Because the Fishmen are also talked about a fair bit. Goodness gracious. Got the driest fucking throat today. What is your opinion on Tifa Lockhart? What? Would. I mean, obviously. Moving on. For Death is actually kind of tricky. Because it's like what? We've got ghouls. We've got kind of like standard vampire count undead. We've got bony boys. We've got ghosts. So like, what else can you do for Death? What I would probably do, if I was at Games Workshop, is I would probably take a long, hard look at undead from other cultures. So especially like, oh, you know what? Yeah, never mind. Sorry. Someone in chat just like immediately was like, shut up, Sotek. Pick the smart thing. Vampire Coast. Yeah, that's what I do. Yep. Give me vampire pirates. Yep, I would do that in a heartbeat. Yep. Vampire Coast. Yep. Yep. Moving on. Are there female dragon ogres? We believe there are. I've never seen one, but presumably there are. We don't know how. It's not stated anywhere how dragon ogres reproduce. It's assumed there are males and females. But there's not any like hardcore evidence. But Games Workshop doesn't tend to worry about shit like that. Are they hot would be the follow-up question. Depends on what you're into. All I'm gonna say is that if you look not that hard, there are some very representations of them in certain places. If you know where to look. Bones, how would you reintroduce the Tomb Kings to Age of Sigmar lore? I would not. I think the Tomb Kings are very highly tied to their identity as Nehekara and that kind of historical inspiration of very Egyptian mythologies type stuff. So I wouldn't bring them over to AOS because they would overlap too much with the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. The Ossiarch Bone Reapers basically are the new Tomb Kings. So I guess the way I would answer this is how would I have more Tomb King like influence is I would give the Ossiarch Bone Reapers chariots and I would also give them more big monsters, more constructs. All right. Vren, what do you think of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers and their skeleton Julius Caesar? Oh, well, perfect timing. I like them. I like them a lot. I think the Ossiarch Bone Reapers are super fucking cool. They have a very distinct culture. The idea that each skeleton is not just a resurrected body, but it's like the best elements of a bunch of different people melded together to make like a perfect creation. And like, so they often have like lots of different people comprising the different constructs, but the Ossiarch Bone Reapers use their bone shaping and their magic to like remove the parts they don't want from like their personalities or their memories and all that, and only keep the bits they want. I think is really fucking cool. Like it's really scary, but really fascinating. It's really fun ways. Does Sotek have a girlfriend? Nah, no, I don't. It's just old Sotek. It's just Sotek hanging out. Thanks for asking. John, hey Sotek, who do you think are the elves in the Mark of Chaos trailer? Do you mean the one with like the one elf that like kills a bunch of Chaos Warriors? It's just a Shadow Warrior. It's a really badass Shadow Warrior. And funny enough, that is probably, unironically, the most lore accurate depiction of an elf fighting in Warhammer. Because like a lot of the time, for balance reasons, elves in Warhammer Fantasy are so squishy that they just die if somebody like breathes in their general direction, because the whole idea is supposed to be that they're like so fast and so skilled that like they're really hard to hit. And when you watch that trailer, you see like these Chaos Warriors of Khorne just absolutely curb stomp this like little Empire battalion. And like the Warrior Priest is the only person getting anything done. Like the Warrior Priest is like, ah, and he's just like killing like easily mopping the floor with these Chaos Warriors one-on-one. But like the regular guys are just getting absolutely obliterated by all these Chaos Warriors. Like it's horrible. Like they're fighting their hardest, and like it's like, okay, maybe a couple of them got lucky like with shooting their guns and stuff, but for the most part, they're just getting rocked. And then when the Warrior Priest is about to die, all of these other, or this elf shows up and just like bodies these Chaos Warriors. Like this one Shadow Warrior shows up and kills like, I think of 5 or 6 Chaos Warriors within like 2 seconds. And you're like, holy fuck. But that's lore accurate. That's like a lore accurate elf. Like they're supposed to be that scary. But the counter is that there's not that many of them. Like they just don't have the numbers. They just don't. And they get so easily overwhelmed. And then, of course, the elf gets crushed under a bloodthirster very unceremoniously, which is like, oh, that's a bummer. Sotek doesn't need a girlfriend because he's already married to a skink priest. No, I would not. No, no, there'd be like so many problems with that on so many levels. No, I don't want to be with skink priest. Thanks though. Like listen, I realize that a truly distressing number of artists on the internet have either taken my skinks and femboyed the fuck out of them, or have just made them just like ladies, and this is not how they work. All right, like I've got lore accurate lizardmen in my brain, and I know what people have done to Saurus. I know what people have done to the skinks. That's not what they're like. But you know, y'all you go off, kings and queens. Y'all, you go off. Joe Miller, any interesting information about the Dispossessed? Yes-ish. Feels like we haven't heard anything about them since we're introduced. So not quite that. The Dispossessed do have current lore, which is the Dispossessed have heard and found out about the return of Grugni. So Grugni, the god of metal, he's back, the big badass himself. And because Grugni has returned, the Dispossessed are on the move. They are leaving a lot of the cities, and they are attacking their fallen holds, and they are attempting to recapture their fallen kingdoms. So basically, the Dispossessed are currently setting about trying to repossess the Khazalid Empire. Hopefully that'll work out and be cool. But yeah, we'll just have to see. Watchdog 39 said, and currently playing in an all Azrai game. Ooh, set in Athel Lauren, my second foray into Wolfrip. Any advice to keep in mind when playing an Amber Wizard from Sithrall? So if you're playing a Amber Spell Singer from Sithrall, the biggest thing that I would say to keep in mind is that as a spell singer, what the kind of magic you use is much more about, instead of like human wizards, where they often are using their magic to like just fuck with reality. So like forcing things to happen the way they want to. Elven magic, especially spell singing, is much more about working with the natural flow of what's going on around you. The natural nature of Athel Lauren, which is obviously a very magically saturated environment, and using that tree singing which is why you're called a spell singer, is that you literally sing your magic into existence. It's often not just like bluntly spoken, it's sung. And as an Amber Wizard, for instance, your singing would be the singing of the birds, the singing of beasts howling and roaring and crying and flowing into that natural state of the bestial life in Athel Lauren, to use it in a way that works to your advantage, of using the natural vision and skittishness and awareness of the birds to scout out locations, using the companionship and the support that comes from a pack of wolves to buff and protect your allies, using the aggression and the brutality of a bear to make yourself into something with claws and fangs to tear apart your opponents, to use what is around you to influence how your magic works, as opposed to just being like, I blah this spell into existence and it does this thing. From a roleplay side of things, I would try and work with what's around you to accomplish the same effect. You can just blah stuff into existence, but a lot of elven magic tends to revolve more heavily around wood elves, especially around the magic of being a part of the weave, being a part of the forest, as opposed to breaking it to your will, so to speak. Ricky Chapman, currently doing a roleplay right now, playing a completely insane Chaos Warrior that worships all the gods and the Horned Rat and Hashit. Oh my god. Any idea how many, what kinds of mutations they would have? That would depend. Mutations are often rewards and punishments from the various gods, but also can come from your environment. So it depends on where you are. If you're up in the Chaos Space, you're probably going to have more mutations. If you're hanging out in like Norska, you're going to have less mutations. So it depends on where you are in the world, I would say, and a lot of what you're doing. If you're often like praying to the gods, you're trying to get their attention, you're succeeding at getting their attention, but you're failing or succeeding, it doesn't matter which, they will reward or punish you with mutations. So if your character is fairly active, and is exposed to a lot of corruptive elements, then they're going to have a lot of mutations. A lot of mutations. Like 8, 9, 10 or more. If your character is a little more low-key, and is in like, is not like super far north or super far south, then maybe he would still have a lot by normal people standards. So might have like 3 to 5. What kind? Randomize it. If you look up the Tome of Corruption, which you can find online very easily for free as a PDF, there is a mutation chart in there that you roll a D1000 for, because it has so many fucking options. And like even within some of those options, you have to roll further D10s to randomize again. I love that mutation chart. It is the best mutation chart that's ever been printed. It is so many fucking weird mutations. And I would heavily recommend that as a good guide. Blah, blah, blah. Necromancer Kobold. What would happen to Dwarf Society if a king from Kanakadrin became a High King, given how Slayers tend to be treated in their culture? So the Slayer King is different than a Slayer because it is not something that it is not a shame that he has personally like done. It is something that has been passed down to him, and he is also a king. And the dwarves recognize that the reason he is a slayer is because there's this conflict of oaths, and it does make them uncomfortable. And they don't, a lot of them don't like to think about it that much because it is so profoundly uncomfortable. But if they were to be High King, it would honestly, what you'd probably deal with is you'd probably have a situation where there would be grumbling about it. There would definitely be certain Longbeards that would not like the idea. But ultimately, I think what it would kind of result in would be like the I think you would probably have an age where Veneration of Grimnir and a more aggressive mindset of like going out, killing monsters, being aggressive, doing things of that nature would kind of jump up to the forefront versus like more traditional kings. Like it could theoretically be possible, but it definitely would be messy. What is my second most favorite fantasy IP? Probably Lord of the Rings. Trying to think, like what I guess it depends on what your definition of fantasy is. If you're like, it has to be like sword and magic, then I would say Lord of the Rings. If it's like anything not real, so like fiction, probably Full Metal Alchemist, like that universe. I wouldn't consider that fantasy per se, but I can see the argument. And then I'm also quite fond of the SCP universe. How to Train Your Dragon. I like How to Train Your Dragon, but I have certain issues with it. It's not, I wouldn't say it's my favorite. It's a great movie. Awesome movie. I love the series. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's enough to answer that. Battlefoot. Oh yeah, Warcraft. Warcraft is definitely up there. Not Warcraft would not be in my top 2. I think Warcraft would comfortably be in like my top 10. It probably would not be in my unless it was like, oh, you have to pick pure fantasy. Then I could see it being in like my top 5, but in most cases it would be in my top 10, but not my top 5. Battlefoot. In Age of Sigmar, are named greater demons on the level of playable gods? Yes. Yeah, most depends. Most of the time, I would say yes. Like if you have Kairos Fateweaver show up on a battlefield and Alariel is against him, that is a fair fight by most measurements. If you have Nagash going up against Scarbrand, that's a fair fight by most standards. Yeah, Elder Scrolls is really good. Yeah, Elder Scrolls is very good. Agree. Autumn Chan is thirst posting. Oh, skinks are hot. Hey, you know what? Don't let's not yuck each other's yums. And although because of my lore opinion, I prefer my Lizardman lore accurate. I'm not going to deny that there are some artists out there that's like, I mean, I don't consider this lore accurate, but like I can appreciate it. It's okay. I see what you're doing. Senjmeister, what's up with the Wanderers, the Nomad Princes? Not a lot. They technically exist. They have one Black Library book dedicated to them, but not a lot is going on with them. The last major update in their lore. So for those that don't know, the Wanderers were basically like the actual OG Wood Elves in Age of Sigmar. They were elves that lived among the forests in Ghyran and across the world. But when Chaos came, the elves abandoned the forest. They fled. Instead of like staying and dying alongside the forest spirits, they ended up fleeing to Azir to survive. And the forest was really upset and really pissed. And Alariel was really upset and really pissed. They do redeem themselves. It happens in 2nd edition. There's a series of big battles that break out, and the Wanderers end up playing, and the Nomad Princes end up playing a pretty key role, and they end up being forgiven, with heavy quotation marks, forgiven by Alariel, where she tolerates them, but she's still not like super happy with them. But they have been making good progress. They've been trying really hard to get back into Alariel's good graces and the forest spirits and all that's good graces. And they've been having some success. So like they've been doing better. But they're still struggling. Donovan, I've heard that overall going to war for Dawi is a very grim, solemn affair. Is this true? And if so, that doesn't seem to be represented in many written games. Art where they seem angry. So, well, okay. So, is going to war for the dwarves often very grim? Yes. They often understand that their situation, and they know it's a pain, and that it's going to cost them a price they cannot afford, but they are aware of it. And so it is often a very grim affair. But when they get there, they are often reminded and start getting very angry, thinking about everything they've lost, about everything their enemies have done to wrong them, of all the grudges that are not struck out, of all of the suffering they've endured, of all the pain they've been through, of everything they've lost, and it makes them pissed. They get fucking furious, which makes them very dangerous. So when you see them in a video game like Total War Warhammer, they are often yelling and extremely pissed off because they're in the battle. And when they start actually seeing the enemy across the battlefield, they're like, those fuckers. Yeah, they get really pissed really fast. That being said, I have always really, really wished that CA would add a little more diversity to them. One of the things that I love about Warhammer Fantasy Dwarfs that's not represented in Total War, but shows up in a lot of the Black Library books, is that when the dwarfs are about to fight a big battle, they often will have a bit of a more solemn beginning before they start to get really worked up, and they start to sing. And when dwarves sing going into battle, it is never a pomp and circumstance. It's never like a hardcore battle song. It is always like a dirge. It's always it's a song of mourning, a song of often like grim determination. Like the songs usually will have this theme of like, they know they're in trouble and this is a bad situation. This is not where they want to be, but they will they'll fight regardless. Like even if it's a completely doomed situation, they're going to plant their feet, they're going to raise their shield, and they're going to kill as many of the fuckers as they can before they all die. And it's one of my favorite things that they'll often do in the stories is like the king will start singing and it like spreads until all the dwarfs are singing the same song. And they'll, be getting like ready for the first really big charge. And it's great. But yeah, their songs are very melancholic typically. But the second they start getting kind of riled up or like they notice like a particular enemy, like Quick Head Tick or something across the battlefield, they start like just screaming obscenities and start getting like really worked up. Which lore unit in Total War do you think is the biggest improvement from pre-existing lore? Biggest improvement. I would say that's a toughie. I would probably say Probably Bretonia. Bretonia's roster has gotten a pretty significant amount of expansions that has added some really great stuff, like, like generic the Royal Hippogriff Cavalry, the Royal Pegasus Riders, the Foot Squires. Bretonia has gotten a lot of really good shit, and feels a lot better than they did in tabletop, because they never ever got updated on tabletop. Poor bastards. I would also say any of the monogods. Monogods weren't a thing and, for most of my life, because they split them in 6th edition, where you had 7th edition. 7th edition, Warriors of Chaos and Demons separated, and they didn't come back together until the end times. In 6th edition, you had the Hordes of Chaos, which was demons and humans together. And you could run the monogod, and it kind of worked, but it was a bit it wasn't that exciting. Like, the rosters were really small. So the fact that Total War has taken the monogod rosters and like vastly expanded them is really cool. Norska is also a really good one. Norska being its own unique roster is also really nice. So I'd say any of those. See, I already answered that one. I answered that one. Darius, I meant to joke about an Ogre Tyrant crapping on a Primarch in terms of strengths. Generally, how powerful is an Ogre Tyrant? And I think smash mountains and break open a Dwarf hold, any other. So just it's Dwarfin with an F, not Dwarven. Dwarven would be a different universe. Dwarfin is how we would do it in fantasy. Chaos Dwarves are probably the best answer, actually. Maybe for like Total War Warhammer, the most improved race is Chaos Dwarves. I would probably say that's fair. Anyway, so Ogre Tyrants. Ogre Tyrants are freakishly strong. They can beat a giant. Like, beating a giant happens regularly enough that it's one of the like ogre names you can get, a big name, where you get Giant Breaker. Giant Breaker is an Ogre Tyrant that has single-handedly defeated a giant in a fight. So one-on-one. And giants are they're so fucking strong. And they're so tough. And they're so big. And an Ogre Tyrant's just like, I'd win. And does. Ogre Tyrants can take on... Ogre Tyrants are the equivalent... They could fight greater demons. That's a fair fight. And there are a number of Ogre Tyrants that have beaten the shit out of greater demons. The fact that when you have a Ogre Tyrant going up against a full-fledged, no debuffs Bloodthirster, and they're like, boom, evenly matched, unstoppable force meets a movable object, they are insanely powerful, very nasty. Would an Ogre Tyrant shit on a Primarch? Maybe in like raw strength. I think pretty much any of the Primarchs would probably beat a Tyrant, unless it was like a really particular Tyrant. Like, a lot of people, funny enough, and it's mostly the end times fault, a lot of people grossly do not understand how strong Grease's Goldtooth is. Grease's Goldtooth is one of the most powerful characters in the setting because of that stupid fucking club, his mace, his scepter. Now, it doesn't help that every story we have about Grease's fighting, he does not use his scepter because he's stubborn and he's just a dumbass, which I kind of love about him. Because the one like really good narrative fight we get with Greasus, he ends up dropping the scepter so that he can like grab a Black Orc and just squeeze him till he like pops, because he's just that fucking strong. But yeah, like, could Greasus Goldtooth kill a Primarch? Abso-fucking-lutely he could, if he hits them with the scepter, because the scepter is just the strongest. It's so strong, dude. Like, wielding the scepter, to put it in perspective, like, Andy, I don't always agree with Andy does this, but I'm gonna do what I often criticize Andy for doing, because it's funny in this case. In terms of tabletop rules, right? Primarchs are like what, like strength and toughness like 6 or whatever, like maybe strength and toughness 7, whatever. Like Grease's Goldtooth with that fucking scepter is strength 10. He's strength 10 and does multi-wounds with that fucking thing. Like just the silliest shit you like. I think it's D3 multi-wounds per hit, and it's strength 10. Like that scepter, because it to explain what it does, the scepter of the Titans is really, really gaudy. That big old gold stick he has that also all the jewels and shit on it. And what it is it is a enchanted something that was made by a Sky Titan. And what it functionally does is that it gives the wielder the strength of a Sky Titan. And the Sky Titans were the biggest motherfuckers that ever walked the Warhammer world. Like there's nothing like them. Just like you're just fucking dead. Like it's so stupid. It's a funny weapon. It makes me laugh. But yeah, Sky Titans are nuts, and Greasus has the power of one. And it makes him very scary. But yeah, anyway, what I would say is like the legitimate answer to your question is, I would imagine that if a Primarch is gonna, if they're gonna raw dog it, so like they're not wearing their like power suits or whatever, and they go up against a Tyrant would probably overwhelm them in terms of raw strength. If they have all their gibbledygook stuff, they would almost assuredly beat Tyrants. I can't imagine they would lose to a regular Tyrant. There might be like a small handful of Tyrants, very small handful, who have magic items that would make them a threat. So like Greasus Goldtooth would be a threat. But I don't see any Tyrants like easily defeating a fully decked up Primarch, unless some of the Primarchs are like not that impressive. But if they're as ridiculous as I assume they are, then most of them could probably handle a Tyrant pretty straightforwardly. But there are some Tyrants out there that can reliably defeat a Bloodthirster. And I think if you can reliably defeat a Bloodthirster, you could probably reliably throw down with a Primarch. So yeah. Gromrindal, Malekith, and Tyrion walk into a tavern. Who passes out first and who gets mugged by the other two? Tyrion would pass out first and get mugged by the other two. Yeah, not even a question. Because Malekith would use magic to cheat and do other nonsense. Gromrindal is basically a living god, and Tyrion's he's great, but you know, he's a kid compared to both of them. Tyrion's a baby compared to both of them. Like he's an excellent fighter. Tyrion's like one of the greatest fighters in the world. Like if him and Malekith had a pure fight where like Malekith's not allowed to use magic, they're just fighting, Tyrion would beat him. But like in a let's go into a tavern and see who gets drunk and passes out first, Tyrion is so fucked. He's so boned against those two. When do you think we'll start seeing unexplored places in the old world? Second edition. I think second edition is going to take us to a new theater of war, and it's going to take us somewhere new. Hopefully. How would the Titans of the world react to powerful magic? Like how Kraken Rock are truly so Crow, if you're asking what would something Kraken Rock's age and size do if someone tried to kill him with magic, I assume that's what you're asking. Is like if someone cast like a god tier spell at him, what would happen? And the answer is it would probably hurt him, but it's not gonna kill him. Magic relies very heavily on the reshaping of reality to the caster's desire to inflict an effect. However, the thing that they are trying to do something to, because if you try to like just do damage, you're not gonna be able to do enough damage. You just can't. Like you could throw the biggest fucking fireball you can imagine at those guys, and it's not gonna hurt them that much. They're just too tough. So you would need to do something that messed with them physically. Like make their heart explode or their blood turn to molten lava, or like make the water in their eyeballs burst into steam or whatever. The problem is there are a couple of notable rules when it comes to magic and dealing with very large, powerful, ancient entities, which is that often they tend to be fairly magical creatures in and of themselves, where they have often saturated in a lot of magic. Many of them wield magic, which is not great. Many of them have been so heavily exposed to magic that they develop a natural resistance. Many of them are so ancient, so primordial, that they are almost always covered in or almost kind of like made of stuff of the earth itself, and they can just discharge the magic. Because if you use magic to manipulate the earth, a lot of the earth naturally grounds magic and naturally absorbs it and harmlessly dissipates it. So if you're trying to like use magic to manipulate Kraken Rock's body in some way, his body is going to have a huge natural advantage at grounding the magic harmlessly. Plus, the bigger something is, the more effort, the more powerful the spell has to be to do anything. And odds are going to be a fucking horrible time. Absolutely god shit, terrible time. It's just not going to be good. It would, most of them would just shrug it off. Like, best case scenario, it hurts them. But like most magic is going to bounce off of them. Either because they're too tough, they're too big, or the amount of damage that you have to do in order for it to actually slow them down is just not realistically feasible before the magic would be so much that you just explode. Because wizards can only physically control so much magic. Even if there's like infinite magic to use, you personally can only hold so much of it before it's going to overwhelm you and you're just going to pop or miscast or explode or get, tear open a hole in reality and demons come pouring out or other stupid nonsense. So yeah. 10,000 ants. If you had to make a new variant for pink/blue horrors and plague bears, what would it be? Well, we already have a new variant for horrors. Thanks to Age of Sigmar. They're called brimstone horrors. And they are what happens when you kill a blue horror. A blue horror splits into two brimstone horrors, and they're little bitty. They're these little horrors that they're like orange in color. They look like natural fire. They're pretty cool, so I would probably just use that. And just make them like there's more of them, but they don't have a shooting attack, but they're kind of spongy because there's a lot of them. So they're like tanky. And then a new variant of plague bears. I don't know. I would probably just do like plague bears with great weapons to be very boring. That would probably be the easiest solution. Alternatively, I could see something that might be interesting would be plague bears that instead of relying more on weapons, have a unique disease that causes like particular debuffs. So like imagine plague bearers that have like a bunch of holes, like very trypophobia, like they've got like a bunch of holes, like bulging little mounds in their flesh. And when they get close to enemies, they like hold their arms out and like insects start like pouring out of their flesh. And it like starts biting the enemies and gets them certain debuffs. So they have like this like almost bark like skin with all these holes that all sorts of insects and parasites and shit come out of. That could be interesting. So maybe it's almost like they have clubs for arms. So maybe something like that is what I might play around with. Manderbone. Hi, Sotek. Quick question. Is there a reason for Khorne not getting priests and bloodthousers in Total War Warhammer 3? Because it feels like Games Workshop are inconstructing. So we know Khorne is getting a new lord in the upcoming DLC. We don't know what it is. I have made my prediction that it could be a Doom Bull. It could be a blood. It's not Blood Father. It's Blood Priest, Blood Seeker. I can't remember what it is, but there is a thing mentioned in the end times that is basically like a blood. It's basically a Khornate Blood Father, but it has a different name. It's not a Blood Father. It's called something else. So they might just use that. I genuinely think it is going to be a Lord level cultist. Like, I think it's going to be a priest type character that's like the Khornate equivalent of a sorcerer lord. GW just does not want them to use something that was made for Age of Sigmar in Age of Sigmar for fantasy. I don't know why. I feel like it shouldn't matter in most cases. Well, okay, maybe not most cases, but many cases. Like, oh, look, a Cornate Slaughter Priest. I would be like, all right, yeah, that could be in fantasy. Like, all right. There's nothing that weird about him. So yeah, that's fine. Whereas, like, if you're like, oh, I want to use like a Sylvaneth, and it's like a tree revenant, I'd be like, ooh, yeah, no, I don't think we can use that. That's a little too different. It's a little too exotic. Or like if you come at me with like Ineth Deepkin, I'm gonna be like, nah, we don't need underwater elves. We got plenty of elves. Yeah, so hopefully, but that being said, I don't want to be like, oh, we're not getting whatever because we don't know what we're getting yet. We got to wait until CA reveals that. What is a Terrorgeist? Are they giant bats? Yes. Yep. That you got it. Yeah, they tend not to be referred to as giant bats. They're called giant chids, like whatever the scientific family term for bat is. It starts with a C. Yeah, the Chiroptera. I don't know how the CH is. I don't know if it's Chiroptera or Chiroptera, but that's what they're always referred to. They're giant Chiropterans or whatever. As for what they like are Terrorgeists are primordial giant bat monsters. So they are colossal ancient bats that lived a long time ago, and well, okay, I'm going to rephrase that. They seem to be a modern day species because whenever you see a Terrorgeist, they often have a lot of fleshy bits, which implies that they haven't been dead that long. So there are living Terrorgeists, in which case they probably wouldn't be called a Terrorgeist. They'd probably be called something else. I've never seen a living one ever. I've never seen a living one even mentioned. But presumably there are living Terrorgeists somewhere. But they seem to come from specific places. So check that out. Grimaldez 937. Thank you so much for the tier 1 sub. I really appreciate that. Any idea for a Khorne super heavy unit in Total Warhammer? Yeah, it's called a Slaughter Brute. Unless you mean like infantry, and then it's called Wrathmongers and Skull Reapers, which we already know we're going to be getting those. Because they revealed that with showing us that they're bringing out Scar Bloodwrath. So Khorne's going to have some very heavy boys coming in the upcoming DLC. Donoman, if you could add any type of unit to any faction Total War, what would you add? Personally, I would add Monstrous Cavalry to Cathay. I think for me, that's a very big Jasseth. I don't know if I thank you. Thank you for 38 months. I would probably. I would choose the Sons of Bretonnia. I would choose Monstrous Cavalry for Bretonnia on the ground. So Kelpie riding magical men that serve the Lady of the Lake. That's what I would pick. I kind of wanted to pick Forest Goblin Spider Riders because I think Greenskins having heavy cav would make sense, especially with Goblin Riders. I think that's a really interesting dynamic. But yeah. Joe Miller, dwarfs need some lady characters. What class would you give them? Any particular hold? Dwarf lady character should be the Valayan Rune Priestess or Rune Priestess of Valaya, or just Dwarf Rune Priest. They're a very well-established concept, and they got reinforced in the most recent Cubicle 7 book, which was awesome. We actually got 3 different types of Rune Priest careers, which was super exciting because they gave us Hearth Priests. Oh God. Smelter Priests, Smith Priests, and then like Grim Priests. So like different specializations of Rune Priests, which was super fucking cool. The careers in that book are awesome. But Rune Priest of Valaya, big old rune staff, have the ability to heal units and like unleash certain kinds of runes onto the battlefield. So like kind of like a rune smith in Total War, but they'd have like a different lore. They'd have different abilities and different focus. They'd be more about like healing, leadership buffs, recovery type buffs. So like vigor healing, health healing, leadership, a couple of damage type abilities. But yeah, dwarf ladies, give them to me. Gimme. That'd be great. Also, I would not be upset at all if they were like, oh, look, here's dwarf engineer lords. Like, here's your engineer guild master, and it just happened to be like a lady. I would have no problem with that. Like, cool. Any particular hold? No, all the holds have different focuses. What do I think about the Blades of Corn faction Age of Sigmar? Yeah, they're cool. They're cool. Biofoot 78. When will greenskins crossbreed boar and spiders? Hopefully never. God, could you imagine? Like, listen, boars are already fucking terrifying. Like, so many people do not understand how rightfully terrifying boars are. They do not need to be crossbred with spiders. I don't want to be anywhere fucking near boars that can like climb things and have venom. No, thank you. Absolutely fucking not. No, sir. So I had an idea for what Gorfang did to the statues of the ancestor gods in Blackgrad. Grimnir head converted to a prison that looks out over a Dawi fighting pit. Grugni statue converted to a pipe that goes down to a large dung heap. Valea watches over a prison where Dawi are tortured. That is super fucking grim. Fitting. Very fitting, but also very grim. Spider Pig does whatever Spider Pig does. Can he swing from a web? No, he can't because he's a pig. Gaston, do you think the Scepter of Titans was always that gaudy, or did Greasus put gems onto it to show his wealth? Greasus definitely pimped it up. Yeah. Greasus 100% went to the pimp my magic weapon class. He bedazzled that shit. Let's see. Darius Rose, Greasus rolling up to 3 vengeful spirit and Greasus rolling up to the vengeful spirit and beating both Horus and the Emperor, then leaves. Greasus just no. See, you gotta make it extra. You gotta make it, if you're gonna rage bait, you gotta do it right. So what happens is Greasus rolls up into the room, beats he shows up as Horus and the Emperor are having their epic final duel. He bitch slaps the Emperor with the turkey leg. He defeats the Emperor with the turkey leg. And then him and Horus fight, and he kills Horus with the Scepter of Titans. Just hits him and just like obliterates the big eye in his chest and just kills Horus. And then he demands the Noblars carry him over to the corpse of Sanguinius, where Greasus breaks off his wings like he's eating chicken, and he eats Sanguinius, chortling amidst the ruin of the vengeful spirit. That's how you piss everybody off. you gotta have your Sanguinius chicken legs. your KF Primarch. Mainpa. Who out of the Warhammer Fantasy characters would paint the coolest Warhammer figures? The most skilled painter? Who? I think it would either be that's fucking tough. You know, contrary to what people might necessarily think, I honestly think like Thorgrim Grudgebearer would probably be a fucking amazing painter because he has so much patience and could hold so still. Like, I could see him being so fucking meticulous. Another actually good character would probably be Belinar the Wise. Belinar the Wise is like a super fucking old elf in Ulthuan. He's been around forever. He was around before the Great Vortex. He has a lot of influence over the White Tower, and he trains a lot of the sword masters of Hoeth. He would probably be a goat painter as well, because he's got that mixture of like age and skill. Sorry, I missed the second part. Would Greases versus Kolek or Durthu be fair? Yes. Yep. Yeah, Greases could fight them. He could, because he's more scary than a lot of people think he is. Are there any named ghoul/crypt horrors other than the Ghoul Knight? No, not really. Unfortunately, interesting ghouls tend to just get immediately buried under Strigoi, because whenever Games Workshop like approaches that, they're like, oh well, if we need a ghoul thing, we'll make a Strigoi vampire, and that would be it, or a ghoul, a Strigoi ghoul king, because like it's kind of a ghoul, but it's not a full ghoul. It's just kind of one. So they don't tend to do that, unfortunately. Bones want to make a Mordheim Tomb King gang that woke up in a museum angry and confused by being put in glass cases. Do Mordheim have museums? Yeah, it absolutely would. What would be some objectives for a Tomb King game in Mordheim? So, that's hilarious, and something I've used a similar concept before. What would be their goal? Their goal would be to gather up all of the different bits that were taken from them. So, like, think about like the British, right? And all the shit they did stealing from like everybody else in the world and bringing it back to England. Where you would have this Tomb King warband in Mordheim, where I would do like a mixture of like some spirits that they've called to them, maybe. And like some of them like have been there, and maybe like a Lich Priest showed up fairly recently, and has like some attendants that came with him, or like some like whatever creatures. And then there's like the actual guys that woke up, like the Tomb Prince or the Tomb King would have actually had woken up there. So like imagine like the Tomb King is missing like one of his hands, because or like one of his closest minions is missing, because some rich assholes took his body and had it like they ate it, because there was a whole weird fucking thing that for some fucking reason rich people back in the day like actually ate mummy bits. So like maybe some of their stuff was taken and eaten, so they got like tracked down the corpses or the mutants or the monstrosities that have the parts of them that were eaten, to kill those and take it back. And maybe like maybe some item was taken from them by a thief, and so it's hiding somewhere else in the city and they got to go find it. Or like the money or like loot that was brought with them was distributed in different places. Maybe like the Temple of Verena has like a scroll that belonged to one of them, because Verena likes to hang on to knowledge. So there's like a ruined Temple of Valea that not Valea, Verena, that has like some old papyrus scroll or something. Or like maybe there's a pigment of paint that was made using mummy flesh, so like ancient corpse flesh. There's a paint pigment that used to be made doing that. Obviously, it's not around anymore, because doing that is very unethical. So like maybe there's a painter who fell to Slanesh that like painted some portrait using the corpse, or using like a part of the Tomb King's squad. So you gotta like track down this painting and like kill the Slanesh demons and the painter, and like get the painting back, so the Lich Priest can like use magic to extract all that part out and put them back together. Like Mummy Brown. Yeah. I would play around with a lot of like real world tropes, to just show how decadent and assholish the people of Mordheim were before they got smited by good old Bellicor, and play around with that a lot. So like I would just take all the tropes of all the stupid weird shit rich people have done with like mummies and like stealing artifacts from other cultures, and just dial that up to 11, and you could have a ridiculous amount of missions to play around with that. Okay, let's see. A Ragnarok boar spider, please, absolutely not. Sean Schultz, why don't they show Dawi in Empire towns? I don't know. They should be there. A lot of towns have dwarf quarters. The Dawi or Imperial dwarfs are a very well known and established concept. So I don't know. I can't answer that for you. Seems kind of weird to me that every creature Games Workshop introduces certain areas like mountains of more illustrated are predators, despite looking like herbivores. Don't they understand that herbivores can be very dangerous and farsome too? Yeah, well, so there's the idea that a lot of the time they're like, oh, well, we want this creature to look threatening, or we want this creature to look like it could show up on a battlefield. Especially because one of the things you will realize about real life is that there's really no such thing as like a pure herbivore. Most, if not all, animals are opportunistic when it comes to protein. So, like, you'll have animals that are ostensibly herbivores. They are like their primary diet is plant matter. But if the opportunity presents itself for them to eat something that's maybe a little more meaty, they will do it. Like they'll eat their own young. They'll eat like small creatures. Like there's so many, you can find clips online of like horses eating baby chickens, goats eating chickens, donkeys, like all sorts of critters out there will eat other animals if the situation presents itself because, hey, protein. So yeah, it's, so I don't think it's something that especially needs to be worried about, but sometimes the Warhammer designers do tend to overtune some creatures to make them a little overly like pointy when they don't necessarily need to be. Okay, I want to bring this up. Have you yelled at CA enough for them to make Greases better in Total War? Yes. Yes, I have. I'll have you know. I will have you know. The Golden Demon Award in Fantasy is won either by elves or dwarves every year, and everyone else is getting kind of sick of it. Well, maybe everyone else. Oh, yeah. Oh man, I thought you meant something very different. My brain was like, that's not right. And I was like, well, maybe people should just suck less. Even though I will never probably ever see a Golden Demon in my life. But no, you meant like in universe. Haha, very funny. Now, I feel like humans would still manage to win from time to time, much to the extreme frustration of elves and dwarves. Like, how dare someone that's less than 100 be allowed to win? Oh, lordy. I know irony. Let's see. Commander Bone, if you had to add new stuff to Dark Elves, what would that be? I would add Statue of Cain, so like an actual moving attacking Statue of Cain, because that's something that has happened in the lore. So I would make Statues of Cain able to move and attack on their own. I would do Manticore Riders. Manticore Rider Cavalry, I think would be totally fine. I think one of those would be fine. Or at the very least, like maybe some Dark Pegasus Riders. I think those could be cool. I would also do. I'd probably do at least one Merworm variant. I could see myself giving the Dark Elves the Spirits of Arith Kial. Oh god, what are they called? I can't remember. They're a type of wraith. Because the Dark Elves are pretty good at binding spirits when they want to. Can't remember what they're called. But it's the Spirits of Arith Kial. Who's one of the nasty gods. That would probably be my general list. The big thing, though, is I want a unique model for the Black Ark Fleetmaster that's designed off the tabletop model. Because the tabletop Black Ark Fleetmaster has a fucking awesome mini. And it's not in Total War, and it makes me sad. All right, am I all caught up? Oh, nope, not yet. Maybe Rescued Mummy Bro can now move between paintings. I mean, that'd be kind of a cool concept. Any major differences between culture differences in Imperial regular dwarves? Yeah, massive cultural differences between them. They are very, very, very different. I would actually recommend picking up Cubicle 7's most recent book, A Player's Hand, Dwarf. I can't remember if it's called Player's Handbook to Dwarfs or the Dwarf Player's Handbook. It's one of those two. But it's their newest book by Cubicle 7. It has whole segments dedicated to that. Donovan, another idea to add to Dark Elves. More units dedicated to other Sith. Yeah. I mean, the Ghost of the Arith Kial would essentially be that. I think most of the other ones are covered, though generally speaking, CA does not like to invent things. They like to adapt things. They don't like to invent things because it requires a lot more GW involvement, which is a pain in the ass. Yeah. What are Feathered Fiends exactly? How are they compared to other casts? Okay, so there is a shitload of terms for other kinds of, for marked chaos spawn that come from other settings. So like if you go back to the Hordes of Chaos book in 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy, when you would take chaos spawn, if you gave them a mark, so like Mark of Khorne, Mark of Tzeentch, etc., they got a new name. They were basically the same fucking thing, but they got new names. So they would be like, hold on, let me pull up a little thing here. Let's see. Question is, do I have that one ready to pull up easily? I do. Look at me. So if I pull up a Hordes of Chaos book and I skip a whole bunch of pages down to the army building section, and I go to the chaos spawn in here somewhere. There we go. We go to the chaos spawn. I can upgrade a chaos spawn to a Beast of Nurgle, which you'll note became a new unit. That became the Beast of Nurgle demon, which is not the chaos spawn. It's just the name got taken. You also had the Fiend of Slanesh, which is not to be confused with the demonic Fiend of Slanesh. Those are two different things again, but they reuse the name. You have the Blood Beast of Khorne, and you have the Fireworm of Tzeentch. But then you had games come out like Age of Reckoning, which reused all of those terms, actually. And those were all big creatures you could encounter. And different games will just kind of keep remixing the same thing over and over, where they basically would take a Chaos Spawn, and instead of just saying Chaos Spawn of Tzeentch, they will call it something else, like a Fireworm or a Feathered Fiend. And that's generally what you are dealing with in that situation. Let's see. If I look at the Feathered Fiends in particular, oh, these are what is this? Oh, this is from 3rd edition. That's interesting. So the Feather Fiend you're asking for specifically is from 3rd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which I did not read. I actually skipped 3rd edition because I did not like it. I did not like the way it ran. I was not a fan of it. But essentially what this is so in this case, a Feathered Fiend is a human that eats tainted warpstone dust and is ritualistically infected by a magical disease. And it turns them into a really horrifying, ugly mutant bird creature. Which is similar to a Chaos Spawn, but not exactly the same. And then if they got particularly unlucky, they could turn into a special colored fiend, which would give them abilities based on one of the 8 winds of magic. Neat. The more you know. Do I think we'll get a big End Times DLC? Nope. I think you're just going to see End Time stuff showing up in regular DLCs because the Khorne, they're literally doing the Khorne End Time stuff in the upcoming DLC. So Skull Reapers, Wrathmongers, Scar Bloodwrath, those are already End Time stuff. So there's no need for them to do a big End Times DLC when they're just adding End Time stuff. Like I think you'll see Thankful Stormfiends and Vermin Lords in a Skaven DLC, but I don't think it's going to be like the end times in all caps. I think it's just going to be, oh look, it's a Skaven DLC. The only character I could see getting like the end times as a DLC would be Nagash, because depending on what he did for them, it's difficult to imagine Nagash not being his own race, his own faction. They could make him a legendary hero. A lot of people would hate it. I would be fine with it, but I know a lot of people would hate it. And so I could see Nagash being something a little different. All right. Anywho, my dudes, that is 3 hours. So thank you all so much for joining me. I hope this was fun. I know it's not nearly at all in the slightest as good as it is when Andy's here with us. I hope he will be feeling much better soon. More just because I adore him and I just want him to not be sick. But also, really hope that we get to see him back with us next week. I will say the best barometer to know about that is that if you are not already, please make sure you are subscribed to both the Rookery Publication YouTube and Twitch channel and the LAWhammer Twitch and YouTube channels, which you can find down in the description. I have all the links down there already on YouTube. Because on Friday, if you see Andy streaming LAWhammer, and on Saturday, he shows up for the Rookery stream, that's a great sign. That means that he's feeling great, and that we'll probably have a Sunday show. If you do not see any streams, that is probably a bad sign. It means we probably will not. Send Andy our lovable wishes. I will be sure to do that. But hopefully we'll have the whole gang back together next week. But my throat hurts. I don't know if I'm getting sick or if I just was like yelling more than I meant to, and just wore my throat out. I don't know which situation I'm in, but I am in a situation. So thank you all. I'm gonna go not talk as much as possible for the rest of the day, and yeah, take care. That's the real bad thing is it's just me talking for 3 hours, and that's hard. So hard. All right, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. Because of the nature of what we are doing, being on this system, it makes doing like little raids and such sticky. So if you're on Twitch, luckily it's easy enough I can send you on a raid. If you're on YouTube, it's not my problem. You're an adult. Go do something else with your day. So thank you all for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. And God fucking damn it. Oh, I spelled it wrong. How dare I mess up? I'm going to be mad at something else for my problems. Take care, guys. See y'all again soon. Bye. Bye 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 bye. Where's the fucking off button on this fucking thing? There it is.